Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 1 of the Ark Podcast. I am being joined by a phenomenal guest panel. On my right, I've got Craig Kelly, former member for Hughes. He is now a member of One Nation. Craig is someone that is now the federal director of One Nation's campaigning. And moving forward, Craig, I'm looking forward to seeing where you're going to start running. On my right, I've also got the lovely Natalie Dumer. Natalie and Craig have both worked together to get Senator Babbitt, who's doing phenomenal work on excess deaths and a bunch of things done. Natalie ran in the federal election and she did very well to get Senator Babbitt elected, and as well as the Libertarian Party getting John Ruddock elected. And on my left, I've got the legendary Topher Field. Some would call him the marbles man, but Topher's actually done a phenomenal job over the last few years in the alternative media space. He is the producer of Battleground Melbourne, an award-winning documentary documenting the world's longest lockdown city, Melbourne, which I'm excited to get into, and I think you guys know where that's probably going. And ladies and gentlemen, as you know, my name is Joel Jammal. I'm here. I am your host of this new show. We'll be here every week, every Thursday. A new show is dropping. What are we going through? Before I tell you about this space at the end of the podcast and why I started it, the stories we're going through this week include Pride Month. Are you ready for a rainbow voice to the Parliament in New South Wales? The Bureau of Statistics, they're removing ethnicity as a question from the 2026 census. Elon Musk, he gets the last laugh with regards to Anthony Albanese and the e-safety commissioner. Apple are partnering with Chat GPT. Is this the beginning of Skynet? Apple also had some objections from Elon Musk, which we're going to go through. Dr. Nick Coatsworth just today saying he's not going to take any more jabs. I know Craig is going to have a lot to say on that. The Lord of Lockdowns, Dan Andrews and Mark Mcgowan win Order of Australia Awards for on Monday. Will Peter Dutton leave the Paris Agreement climate deal? Will he do more immigration cuts than 25%? Hunter Biden is guilty on all gun charges. How does this compare to Trump's injustice? Nigel Farage throws his hat in the ring and threatens the Conservative Party in the upcoming UK elections. Right-wing parties dominate the EU elections. What does that mean for the continent? French President Emmanuel Macron freaks out as a result of seeing those results in the EU elections, and he's called an early election for France. Aussie kids turning into alpha males. Teachers and the media are blaming Andrew Tate. And the CFMEU union leader, John Setka, threatens the AFL. And lastly, China buys up land in the USA around military bases. Is that happening in Australia? I don't know if we're going to go through all of that. But you are stuck with me for an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours. Let's see what we can get through. Ladies and gentlemen, the first topic I want to get into is tied into the actual idea of the Ark, the idea of this story. Why did you pick the Ark, Joel? I kind of regret not calling the first show I ever did in 2020 the Ark with a K, the boat. We're in Pride Month right now. And the funny thing about Pride Month is they obviously use the rainbow as their sort of symbology. I am so annoyed with the fact that a Christian symbol, an Abrahamic a religion symbol, has been hijacked by the left. Originally, the flag, it used to be 6 colors. And it goes back to the story of Noah's Ark. God was so disgusted by what was going on in the earth. He flooded the earth, clean slate. He saved Noah and his family, and they started anew. And God said, I never flood the world again, hence why he did the rainbow. So he saved all the animals 2 by 2 and also the family of Noah. Now it's used as a symbol of pride that, almost the LGBT community saying, no, we're not, God said he was not going to flood the world again. And here we are. Now, the Ark podcast is about uniting people of similar values, especially the Abrahamic religions in a time of turmoil, refocusing Aussies back on Aussie issues, not things that are happening tens of thousands of kilometres away, and refocusing our guns on an establishment we had on the run with the voice vote only 6 months ago. And so going into this specific topic, I thought this might be really, really interesting. On the slideshow, we had a few photos with regards to the LGBT community. we're all familiar with this image. Absolutely disgusting. This is out of America, young child with the LGBT flag. But I thought you might find this quite interesting, and this probably epitomizes the movement. Rainbow falafel. For Pride Month, this particular organisation has rainbow falafel for sale there. And in Australia, you might say, Joel, okay, why are we so focused on what's going on overseas? But in Australia, we're seeing Bunnings. Bunnings have put LGBT flags everywhere. This is from Clyde in Victoria. And one constituent there, Ed Sparius, good friend of mine and of the podcast, he wrote to the director of Bunnings and he said, on Monday, I attended your Clyde North store to purchase products to be faced with an arc of LGBT flags as I entered the store. And LGBT flags at 2 of your checkouts. I would like to make it very clear that I attend Bunnings to buy various hardwares and other products. He's a tradie. I don't come to Bunnings to have social engineering shoved down my throat. I'm a person who is thoroughly fed up with having the LGBT sexual behaviours displayed everywhere. I, for one, won't be buying any products at your store with these while these displays are in place. And of course, we've also got the banks on board with this. Guys, what do you think about all of this? Craig, I might throw it over to you first. This particular area is something where you've seen it's quite pernicious in what's going on. Tell me.
I'd be very interested to see how much taxpayer money is going to this. Now, some group wants to have their own, special event. I say good luck to them. But don't come to the taxpayer. Don't hit the government up for the funding. And we see with these large corporates, it just shows how much out of touch these large corporates are. We saw it during the Voice debate. They're all on board the Yes campaign. Now, I think this shows a lack of competition in the Australian market, that you've got these big companies being taken over by a woke agenda that's completely contrary to what their customers want, as you just saw by that email there. Look, I said, taxpayers should not be funding this stuff. Full stop.
Sorry, before I get to the other panelists, I forgot to mention the LGBT voice to the Parliament, which I'm showing on the slideshow now. I thought this was a joke, but this came out about a year ago. I heard rumours about an LGBT voice. They were getting quite jealous of the fact that the Aboriginals had a voice to the council. Now we're looking at a situation where they want to have a direct voice to the Parliament for LGBT community people. I think this completely, it lacks transparency with regards to how these people are elected. The idea of the council is so that they can inform the government and have like an extra ability to reach them. Topher, what do you think about this? I mean, this is, to me, I was shocked when I saw this.
Well, 2 things straight up. First of all, if every single major corporate and every major political party is on your side, you're not the one who's oppressed. Right? Stop playing the victim. Stop pretending like you need extra representation, like you should be looked after and mollycoddled in some special way. But secondly, it's no surprise that they seized a religious symbol as their own, because this is the rise of a new religion. And we actually, to see the origin of this, we've actually got to go back about 4,000 years to the worship of Ishtar in the land of Canaan. And you can see it in other expressions. The same spirit of Ishtar was exhibited in Venus. It was exhibited in Aphrodite and these other gods that were worshipped by other cultures. But fundamentally, this feminine god was actually all about transgenderism. It was all about this exactly the same culture that we're seeing here of same-sex attraction, transgenderism, these sorts of things. What we're actually seeing right now is not the outworking of a secular liberalism. This is actually a return to an ancient religion. This stuff happened thousands and thousands of years ago. We have it recorded in the Old Testament and other historical books. We know that it happened then, and it's actually coming back now. But I want to put to bed one very, very pernicious question. A lot of people ask, is transgenderism sort of nature versus nurture? Is this something that's in our DNA? Is it actually in us? So do we inherit it from our parents, or is it sort of a social contagion that we get from societal inputs? And I think we've actually finally proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that transgenderism is conclusively inherited from your parents. Because studies have actually shown that you are 10 times more likely to be transgender if your mother has blue hair.
Right. Makes sense.
I love that.
So it's definitely inherited.
It is inherited, yes. I want to add to that. For me, it was all about the fact that, okay, you are LGBTQI, whatever you are. Why in God's name are we putting children at risk of this and putting it in front of their faces. One thing is when it's behind closed doors, you know, if I'm heterosexual, I'm not going to go and flaunt that in front of a child. So when you're looking at where the schools are at, they've got rainbows in schools. My council has a rainbow driveway, and I am very tempted to go in there and say which colour represents the heterosexuals, or just, you know, have about 100 people turn up and say, I don't feel represented, so should I stop paying my council rates? And at the same rate, you've got diversity, equity and inclusions. Where's the heterosexual inclusivity?
Yeah. No, it's shocking. Look, this whole thing about the voice and the LGBT voice, my worry, and Craig, you might have a better insight to this with regards to government, my worry is that the very active, particularly leftist groups, similar to Get Up, they really try to stack these organisations on their own.
Oh, look, you can see that in Canberra. Just have a look at all these bureaucracies in Canberra, completely stacked with left-wing ideology. And it becomes almost like this cult that you have to try and get up the tree of the public service somewhere. You've got to actually bow down to all these things, you know. And you see some of the salaries that are involved in public service today. You forget going out into private enterprise and trying to work and create, you know, real goods and services. Right? Get into the public service, climb up that greasy pole, and that requires you to bow down and pay homage to all these things.
Yeah. No, I you know, looking at these things come through, I really worry about it. If we could go to the very first video I've got there. One encouraging thing I see is that a lot of kids are actually rebelling against this particular thing. You know, even mankind rebels against God. Of course they're going to rebel against their own government. This is a kid basically stamping on the flag. If you don't mind playing that one more time. That's from a friend of the podcast, Elijah Schaefer. That I do believe that's in Lithuania, where a kid was handed a rainbow flag and he's just stepping on it. I think that these things, they're on a clock. I think God's a funny guy. I think people will rebel against these things. Heck, kids, they will rebel against our parents to an extent. You know, coming into, what do you think about that?
Every culture breeds its own counterculture. And what the LGBTQ plus community hasn't realised yet is that they are now actually the culture. They won. Congratulations, guys. You won. You got what you wanted. But they haven't changed their tactics. They're still engaging tactics as though they're the counterculture. And what's happening is the real counterculture, which is much more conservative and much more libertarian as opposed to liberal in the American sense of the word, and believes in individual expression and freedom, sure, but don't you dare shove it down my throat. You can use whatever pronouns you want for yourself, but don't you dare tell me what pronouns I'm going to use for you. And there's a lot of young people now just going, I can be cool by rebelling against the culture. What's the culture? It is these guys. They haven't adapted to that reality yet. They're playing catch up. We're seeing the rise of what's called the brohemians in America, and these are kind of college frat boys that are just taking no nonsense. They're just not putting up with the crap anymore. And we're seeing a critical mass forming. I mean, obviously in parts of Eastern Europe, it's even more advanced. But even in English-speaking countries, we're seeing a critical mass being formed where these people can't be cancelled, they can't be taken down piecemeal, they can't be targeted the way that was possible 5 years ago. Every culture breeds its own counterculture, and we're watching this incredible shift happen before our eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, look.
Just on that.
Please, yeah.
Very interesting point of what we see in this sort of pushback. There's some recent polls we saw from both Germany and Canada, which shows people under the age of 30 or 35, they are now majority voting for the Conservative parties. Now, it's always been, you know, ever since I was at school, you know, people on what they say, if you were, you were a green when you left school sort of thing, you didn't have a heart and those things. And as you developed and you went through your life and you got more life experience, you realised how wrong you were. Now we are seeing the exact opposite. Now we are seeing, we've saw the polls out of Canada, and we saw in Germany, and I'd imagine it's the same in many other countries, that it was seeing so many young people now saying, hang on, I disagree with the way all these left ideologies are pushing. This is not in my best interest. And they're supporting the Conservatives. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. I think we'll see more and more of that here in Australia as well.
We've got a little way to go in Australia. I do have a teenage daughter who does attend university. And unfortunately, they're still quite left-leaning. So when The Voice vote was around, one of their lecturers came out and said, let's all go in unison and vote yes for The Voice, which I find is absolutely astounding, that we've got an education facility that is full of indoctrination instead of education. There is no critical thinking taught to our youth. We do have a problem.
Yeah. However, younger people today, I think part of the reason why we're seeing these incredible shifts, which are happening, very, very real and happening before our eyes, is because they were raised with the consequences of the sexual revolution. So the boomers got to enjoy the sexual revolution themselves, but their children and their grandchildren are enduring the long-term consequences. And guess what? They don't like what they're seeing. They're enduring the broken homes that came from the free love era. They're enduring the mental health crisis that comes from the purposelessness that comes from the abandonment of faith. They're actually living the consequences of that 1960s sexual revolution. And now we're watching 60 years later as people are saying, no, forget the fake stuff, forget the fun stuff, forget the hedonism. Give me purpose over pleasure any day of the week. And that's the movement that's coming out amongst young people right now.
Absolutely. I think in terms of setting culture, if we could bring up the next video coming up, Craig, your good friend Malcolm Turnbull, who I know you're on first name basis with, Malcolm was on Q&A.
When you see Trump with Putin, as I have on a few occasions, he's like the 12-year-old boy that goes to high school and meets the captain of the football team.
You could just pause it there for a second, Jordan. What's really funny about this, and the reason I bring it up, you watch the culture being set in real time with the particular notice to Q&A and how it's set up. Humour, actually laughing at this, that how could you not believe in climate change, Craig? And then everyone laughs and they gang up on you and they stack it. Keep playing. So in this video, he's actually talking about Donald Trump and his ties to Putin.
It is really creepy. It's really creepy. Now,
and that struck you at the time?
Oh, absolutely. It struck everybody. It was like you could touch it. It was creepy. The creepiness was palpable.
Are you trying to say they're having a bromance?
No, I'm not saying. I'm just telling you what I saw. Regrettably, the Republican Party under Donald Trump, and particularly the right wing of the Republican Party, are very sympathetic to Vladimir Putin. I mean, I've been with Trump and Putin. Trump is in awe of Putin. Tyrants are often popular. You see, the key to democracy, liberal democracy, is that it empowers the majority, but it also, through the rule of law, constrains the majority. And if you get to the point where anybody who can muster a majority, and I don't think Trump can do that, by the way, but anyone who can muster a majority is given absolute power and then can do whatever they like to the minority, that's not a democracy. That is a tyranny. That is an autocracy, even if it's got the support of 51% of the population. That is not what makes a democracy. A democracy, as we understand it, is one where the rule of law protects all citizens and the rule of law applies to all citizens, whether they're the president or the prime minister or an ordinary, elector.
Guys, sorry, I couldn't. If you heard me chuckling in that, Q&A annoys me so much. What do you believe in, democracy or not? Guys, just lay in.
Isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? I mean, really?
We want democracy, but not too much democracy.
So first of all, Malcolm Turnbull, NBN, Snowy 2.0, Water Act of 2007, just to name three back-of-a-napkin ideas that he had that has turned into absolute millstones around the neck of this country. The point that he's making is actually valid. It's just not his point to make. He has absolutely no right to make that point, and he shouldn't have been talking to a public audience. He should have been in the ear of Scott Morrison during COVID and reminding him of that fact. What he's talking about is this tension between the rule of law, which is the historical liberal democratic or libertarian understanding of law. That is, there are absolute laws that even the government can't break. Rex lex, the law is king. The king is still subject underneath the law. Versus legal positivism. Now, this is something that we've seen expressed throughout history as the divine right of kings or various ideas like that. During the Nazi era, you won't be surprised to learn that German courts worked on legal positivism. Now, what this essentially says is if the government can write the laws and enforce the laws and no one can stop them, then it must be right. That's essentially legal positivism. If they can write the law, then it's fine. We saw that during the Nazi era. So much of what they did, of course, was legal, technically. So much of what we saw Australian governments, federal and state, doing during COVID was legal. Doesn't mean that it was right. It doesn't mean that it wasn't a human rights violation. Now, I think we're going to get to the Human Rights Commission a little bit later on. But the point he's making is valid. He has no right to make that point.
What I'm concerned about that is that I want to see a good relationship between the president of USA and the president of Russia. I want to see that they've got a relationship where they can pick up the phone and talk to each other. Right? One of the gravest threats in the world that we have is not one side deciding to press the button, but a miscalculation. At the moment, we've got, we saw the other day, we've got Russian naval vessels going into Havana. This is like what the Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0. for Turnbull to somehow try and criticise relationship between Trump and Putin, to me, just shows how completely out of touch it is. You want that relationship. The world needs that relationship. It's not, we live in a world today of nuclear weapons. It's not like the 1940s where, yes, you could thump the table and, yes, Mr. Hitler, we are not talking to you. Russia is a nuclear power, right? You have to be able to have discussions with them. I want to see the leader of the free world, who hopefully will be Trump after this next election, be able to pick the phone up at any time and talk to Putin in the best friendly terms possible. The same with the North Koreans, the same with the Chinese. That's the relationship you want by leaders at the top of the thing. Turnbull going on like that, how does it achieve anything for the world if you've got a hostile relationship between Putin and the US president? It doesn't. It puts it all at very grave risk.
Yeah. But how can you even say that when during the Trump era, there was a lot less wars? There was no wars. I'm sorry, but Trump was the one that had a great relationship politically with many, many nations. And now we've got someone who probably wears a nappy leading a country. I mean, seriously, and there's so many wars. There's so many problems in the world. I'm sorry, Malcolm Turnbull, stick to wearing an aqua teal suit when you came to vote for the Teals at Allegra Spender's booth.
Can we offer an apology, though? Who was the Alaska... I think she was a senator who then was a presidential candidate, and she is famous for the line, "I can see Russia from my house." Like, I understand what Russia is. What was her name? Gosh.
The comments will save us.
That's Drill Baby Drill she was.
The comments will save us. Tell us in the comments who I'm trying to remember. We owe her an apology because she was mocked for warning that Russia was an issue. They're like, "Oh, go back to the Cold War." And then, 8 years later... Here is everybody on the other side of politics, and I'm sorry, Malcolm Turnbull is not a Liberal. He's the best Prime Minister that the Labor Party ever had. And all of a sudden, they're the ones screaming about Putin. I think we owe someone an apology.
Yeah, I don't trust him as far as I could throw him. But Malcolm Turnbull being the guy that quite articulately said, I reject the voice of the Parliament because it would be a third chamber. And then he later campaigns for the voice of the Parliament. It's like, how more out of touch could you be when 60 to 70% of the country is saying no? I don't think he was very happy on the referendum night. Not at all. A similar story going into this sort of establishment tack. You guys would have heard the news this week on the slideshow I've got. Elon Musk had the last laugh with regards to the E-Commissioner, Anthony Albanese's e-safety commissar, as Elon Musk put it. Basically, the lawsuit's been dropped now, and Elon's, this obviously all blew up early on a couple of months ago. You guys might remember when Bishop Murray, friend of the show, was actually stabbed, and unfortunately, that was on the live stream, so a lot of people were traumatized by that. But then the Safety Commissioner, not getting her way in banning it from all Australian users, even VPN users, tried to mandate the whole world not see that, an actual crime taking place. And Elon's, guy's from South Africa. He's got a libertarian streak in him. I've had a soft spot for Elon for a very long time. Craig, you didn't mince words with this.
Look, let's take it from the start. Firstly, if you thought this e-safety commissioner should ban the video and people shouldn't see it, the way she carried on actually gave it what he called the Streisand effect that made more people want to watch it. Yeah. So she's had exactly the opposite effect of even if you're on her side, right? Secondly, there's the absurd court case that she ran. They were basically running the argument that here in Australia, we have the ability to censor the internet on a global scale. That was what she was arguing in court. It was a complete nonsense. Yeah. Waste, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars she spent on this court case, right? Finally, I'm sure her lawyer would have said, look, this is pathetic. We can't possibly win this. We're wasting money. So she pulled the pin after going after Musk. Yeah? As a likely disgruntled Twitter employee as well. Yeah. I have called for her to be sacked. She is completely out of control in what she's doing, right? But unfortunately, I saw Peter Dutton the other day in Parliament praising her. And I saw David Coleman, the coalition spokesman on communications, also praising it. It's as though they're frightened to criticise her. This is a highly paid government bureaucrat, completely out of control. And we saw, I don't know if you might have that video later that you saw her, where she was, I think, at one of the Davos conferences.
All right, missed that.
And they asked her, they said, do you think what about freedom of speech? And she said, no, she said and the Fourth Amendment. She said the First Amendment in the US. She said, no, the First Amendment doesn't apply in Australia. I get to decide sort of thing.
She did decide because when the day before we had a Westfield massacre and it was all over social media, I saw what looked to be a dead body in Chanel, and that was all good. That was okay. I mean, I found that was more disturbing. So how do you pick and choose? I mean, who gives her the power to be the decider of truth, the decider of what people see?
This has been the problem with every single attempt to censor free speech, and this isn't a new problem. I was part of the campaign against the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard's News Media Council, a thing that was proposed by the Judge Finkelstein in his report, and she really wanted, Prime Minister Gillard really wanted to push this through. She really wanted the power for the government to decide what the news media were and were not allowed to say. And the point that I made, and many others made as well, I was a small part of a very big campaign to push back on that, was according to whom? The minute we say you're only allowed to say what's true, well, true according to whom? I mean, we have entire court cases because there are two people who are absolutely sincere in their belief that they are right and the other person is wrong. You know, we used to have, back when free speech was a thing, universities where incredible minds who understood the intricate details of incredibly complex but also relatively scientifically verifiable topics would come to loggerheads and they would duke it out of their different ideas. If you can't even come to an agreement on something that's scientific like that about who's right and who's wrong, well, who gets to be the arbiter of things that are much more nebulous?
The Stalinist Russia was like that. My parents were from there. My mother truly believed that Stalin was her father.
Wow.
This was the indoctrination. I mean, we're heading down that pathway as well. Julie Inman Grant, I just don't understand why she needs to be paid over $400,000 a year.
And on top of that, the idea that the bishop didn't even want it to be taken down either. He said, no, look, any attempt to use my tragedy where I was stabbed in the neck multiple times, and thankfully, by the grace of God, he's still with us, that you were trying to censor the world. I mean, who do you think you are? He actually wrote a statutory declaration in Elon Musk's defense, saying, no, the video should stay up. Any attempts to use this is reprehensible, basically. And, you know, it didn't fall down long after that. And let's not forget, everyone else around the world that's watching this, the dictators, maybe some even more left governments, New Zealand, who knows? Like, New Zealand's a lot better now, better government ever since October, but they might get ideas too, and they might start censoring the world on hate speech with regards to whatever. And that's what I'm worried about.
Also, this is just the start. Remember, we've still got this mis and disinformation bill coming before the Parliament. So where we are at the moment, you say we've gone completely too far in the wrong direction. We should be actually trying to protect free speech to make sure that these big social media platforms actually act as platforms, not publishers, and censoring stuff. Like I'm still banned from Facebook. A life ban from Facebook. I can't even get a page back up, right? We had, during the COVID period, we found out through Freedom of Information, I had both the Health Department and the Department of Home Affairs writing to Twitter trying to censor me. So there I was, a sitting member of Parliament, putting speeches up from the parliamentary speeches, and we had government bureaucrats behind the scenes secretly trying to censor what I was saying. And that's the direction these people want to head us in. So not only should this Julian McGrant should be sacked, we should actually completely abandon this mis and disinformation bill. And we should be going in the complete opposite direction, where I say we should have a simple rule. If you can say something, if it's lawful to say something in the town square, standing on a soapbox, it should be unlawful for a social media platform to censor it.
And before I forget, when you were censored, let's not forget there were no violations on your Instagram.
Right, none.
There was no violations on your second Facebook page, and they banned you from a Linktree, which doesn't even post things. Right. And the last thing I'll say on this is you actually asked the Speaker of the House. They are in contempt of Parliament. Yeah. Can you do something?
Well, don't get me started on the Speaker. That was one of the greatest betrayals of parliamentary Westminster parliamentary history. The Speaker is there to protect the free speech of the Parliament. Now, what he did, I took a complaint to the Speaker and said, we cannot allow these large foreign social media platforms to be censoring the proceedings of federal Parliament. That's what they did to both George Christensen and myself. We had someone overseas in Twitter and Facebook and YouTube looking what was being said in the Australian Parliament, right, in the debates in the Australian Parliament, and saying, no, we don't think that should be done, and they were cancelling it. And the Speaker of the House should have stood up for free speech, but he didn't. He rolled over and supported.
Like, if that's not foreign interference, I don't know what foreign interference is. Like, we're talking about
where are
Russian.
the fact checkers? Where are they located? I mean, even to this day, we've got fact checkers putting up little messages of spreader of misinformation, disinformation. You are missing context. I mean, really? And what context are you missing when you're actually stating studies and facts, true and perfect studies and facts?
And this is actually really important. And coming back to what Craig said, I don't think it's actually enough for us to demand that Julian Mingrant loses her job. I think that the actual entire department should be abolished, and whoever approved the creation of the department should either be fired or, if they're an elected politician, sent back to the backbench and unable to hold a ministry. We've actually got to push back beyond the point of just setting things back to where they ought to be. One last thing on that quickly. I got an email from the Australian Associated Press the other day because I did an interview with a funeral director in Sydney. And she said that her experience of what she was seeing before her eyes was that she went from burying one infant a month to 4 per week in the last 2 years or so. And she has her theories as to why that might be. They got in touch with me and had the gall to demand the source information, by which they meant studies or, published, something that I could send them a link to, for this woman who's worked in the industry for decades, expressing her lived experience of what she was seeing before her eyes. And I cracked it. And I should actually post my reply publicly. I basically wrote back and said, who do you think you are? That you're going to sit there with your computer and do some Googling, and you are going to stand as the arbiter over this woman who is speaking in her area of expertise where she's been working for decades. How dare you spare me? And by the way, you might want to start reading your contracts, because as lawsuits begin where people have been harmed because of the misinformation that was allowed by these companies, or harmed because of the true information that was suppressed by these companies, lawsuits are going to come. And you might want to have a look at your contract and figure out whether you might bear some liability. I'll update you when I get a reply to that one.
That's an interesting story. I had a similar experience with Dr. Zelenko. You may remember Dr. Zelenko did a video to President Trump, said, President Trump, I think I've got a solution to the COVID problem. And he laid out his prescription with hydroxychloroquine and gave out how he's having success with it, right? I looked at that. Someone sent it to me. I looked at it. I thought, now, before I reposted it, I checked, okay, is there a Dr. Zelenko? Is this in New York? He had the Hasidic beard. Is this correct? I looked at it and found it and said, yes, okay. I was happy to press send, right? A couple of days later, I got a call from a journalist at the ABC demanding that I apologise for posting false information. I said, hang on a minute. How can you say it's false information? Oh, Facebook decided that it was. And I said, can't you see you're missing the story? The story is, here we have a doctor giving his real-life experience on what he's seeing and what he's doing as far as COVID, right, with the potential treatment. And someone at Twitter that is not a medical expert has decided that doctor is not only wrong, but should be censored. And the ABC didn't get it. It was all about, we've got to censor, stick to the narrative. This is why we read. I think the legislation we need should be in the opposite direction, and that is to protect free speech. You talk about the E-Safety Commissioner, the only thing that the E-Safety Commissioner should be do is when it comes to protecting children from pedophilia. That's it. That's it.
We don't need her to do that.
No.
We've got other people who can do that. That's I'm sorry, that's a waste of, like I said, $400 and whatever $1,000 that we pay her a year, because she's got a godlike complex, as we know. She's been nicknamed E. Karen for a very, very good reason, because there's not a lot of intelligence going on there. We really don't need her. Yes, we don't need pedophilia, that's for sure, but she's not the one that needs to be deciding that.
And Australia's like, we're the laughing stock of the world. I mean, not only are we no longer associated, with Crocodile Dundee and all of those tough things. We're meant to be the toughest country in the world, easygoing, Aussie larrikin spirit, and they're just ruining it again with this. And she's not even fully Aussie, is she? She wasn't born here.
Dual citizen.
Was she born here?
No, she's got a dual citizenship. She's got an American and Australian citizenship. So I don't even know why she's in this position.
My opinion is, if our senators can't have dual citizenships, neither should if you can have that much power. I mean, wasn't it a Liberal that brought this person in?
Absolutely. I think we had him on earlier, Malcolm Turnbull. He was there. Right? Oh, there's a great video of him saying, "Oh yes, I've recruited this, Julian Mingrant, isn't it wonderful?" sort of thing.
Isn't that what happens all the time? The Liberals bring it in, and the Labor kind of force it.
What was interesting? One of you talk about being an Australian. One of her comments that she made was often, it's these little comments they make that is the giveaway. She said, "This is something that the Australians shouldn't see." Right? There she was, basically putting the Australians as someone she's above, and she should be dictating to us like children how we should see it.
It makes me sick. Look, before I forget, the last graphic I'll bring up on this topic is how much Australia is censored across the world versus other countries on TikTok. As you can see, Australia is the number one amount of accounts that are actually nuked from 2022 to 2023. This is disgusting from what I can see. I mean, are there any dictatorships? Supposedly Russia gets less people nuked than Australia.
Can I share a story on this?
Please.
So during all the madness down in Melbourne, we ended up with a protest in front of the Shrine of Remembrance. Not my choice of location, but we ended up there because the armoured car was driving up and down Elizabeth Street and the riot police and the anti-terror police were shooting rubber bullets at people. We ended up there, and of course we had the shameful scenes of the police lining up, firing squad style and just shooting at protesters at the Shrine with the rubber bullets. Shortly before that happened, Rukshan was there doing coverage. Rukshan, big shout out to Rukshan, amazing guy. And he points the camera at me. He says, "Topher, talk to me, what's going on?" I'm like, "Oh, thanks for the heads up, mate." And I just simply said what was happening. I said, we didn't want to come back to the Shrine of Remembrance. It's hallowed ground, but we felt we had no choice, and we had to come back here. When we're being shot at with rubber bullets and chased by the anti-terror police, we had to come back here and appeal to our ancestors and appeal to the freedoms that they fought for and that they won for us. And that video went viral, and someone quickly grabbed it out of Rukshan's feed and stuck it up on TikTok. And my niece, who I won't name, she found it on TikTok, and she got in touch with my wife. She said, "Oh, Topher's on TikTok," and sent the link. And then all of a sudden that link stopped working. So she went and she found some other, because it was getting shared all over the place, she found some other ones. And before her eyes, she was watching them working and then gone. She was literally in TikTok at the time, finding my videos as they were disappearing off there. And that completely changed her life because she'd seen the censorship happening in front of her eyes. It changed her whole perspective on life.
Makes me sick. You know, when I was trying to get John Ruddick elected, or even in the Victorian election, state election, the RMIT Fact Lab and, Australian Associated Press, it's almost as though they timed their fact checks to drop right when the Turning Point Australia How to Vote cards came out. It's like, you guys are directly impacted because they get money from overseas organizations, right? Like the George Soros, Open Society Foundation, a lot of these fact-checking ones. I'm not sure about RMIT Fact Lab and Australian Associated Press, but the idea that they're going to do that and then, call it democracy, let the voters decide. Let the voters decide and go from there.
Here lies the whole problem of all these, whether they be RMIT, the TGA. All this is conflict of interest. Who's funding them? They are following whoever's giving them the money. I mean, the best statement is follow the money. And when you follow the money, you find out who's actually dictating to these bureaucrats, and they are bureaucrats who are forcing us to do the things we don't want to do or censoring us.
Yeah. A day of reckoning is going to come on this. Did you guys have anything else to say on this topic?
I just think we've got to go back. We do need legislation to prevent these social media companies from censoring what is otherwise free speech and what would otherwise be lawful to say in the town square. They have taken over what was effective, the old debating town square. They now have monopolised it in a way, right? Now, if they're going to put censorship controls, imagine on the old town square if someone got up and said something that the government didn't like and the police hooked him away and put tape around his mask and threw him off and said, "Mate, you're not allowed back into coming to the town square to give your opinions." That's effectively what's happening today. Yeah. Now, we need... they should be treated as common carriers, that they must not be allowed, especially with political speech, to censor it. We've got to get back, if we're going to improve society, it's got to get back to the old-fashioned way, the contest of ideas. Absolutely. And you learn where people put forward an idea that's bad, you actually benefit from that because it gives you the opportunity to rethink through your thought processes. This idea that everything should be censored, we disagree with, is a very, very dangerous slope that we're going on.
Yeah, I think all of these things, they're just being done to basically demoralise us, especially the grassroots. If they can demoralise you, a bit like, China intimidating Taiwan, different topic, but then they can actually force you into a surrender without even actually fighting the battle and getting both sides bloodied. It kind of but this is the thing. I have so much faith in people. You guys all, you meet amazing people around the country, Craig and Natalie and Topher, and the energy's got to go somewhere, and it's going to often come up and pop up in ways that you don't expect. I have so much faith in people in the way that they come up with these ideas and, and the way we get behind them. It kind of reminds me of that line in Star Wars with Governor Tarkin and Princess Leia, where she says, the more you tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. I just think that I have so much faith in the Australian people with regards to coming together. They voted against The Voice. I mean, they don't like what this establishment has done through that COVID period, and they're seeing they have a lot of regrets. Going onto this next topic of big tech, it was actually recently announced that Apple is going to be partnering with OpenAI, where they're going to basically be integrating Chat GPT with iPhones, iPads, and Macs. This is particularly troubling. Elon Musk has completely protested against it. He said if Apple integrates OpenAI at the OS level, then all Apple devices will be banned at my companies. That is an unacceptable security violation from what they've done. And visitors will have to check their Apple devices at the door, where they'll be stored at a Faraday cage. I don't know what that is.
Do it.
It's-
I would love this to happen.
Yeah,
No, literally, like as an analogy, this is what people have been explaining it. Apple is the phone in the door. It's the hand in the door, the knob per se. Then you see a link to OpenAI. Advertisers are keen to get that information. Intelligence agencies, and we all know about that.
Mm-hmm.
The open door between Australian and other Five Eyes countries like the US, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK. Tim Pool challenged Elon Musk, why don't you make a Tesla phone?
Yeah.
And hey, look, if he did that, I would totally get on board with it because I don't really like that, there are so many iPhones here and I don't really trust Apple to do the right thing. This could be the start of Skynet for all we know.
He needs to hurry up and actually get that done because there is a massive market opportunity and there are other people already beginning to fill the void. And at the moment they're niche operators, but as soon as one of the big players cottons on to just how big this opportunity is, it'll change. They're already, there are small bit player operators selling particular phones where they've got all the settings buttoned down, they've got all the, the bad apps are removed, etc. And they basically sell it to you in a form where it's about as secure as it can get. Any phone's going to give away data. Any phone's going to give away information on you, but they do a pretty good job. The problem is it's clunky. You're dealing with a small company. The after-sales service may not be amazing. You haven't got sales points all over the world, etc. The minute one of the big manufacturers goes, oh, you're going that way, we'll go this way. I promise you, they will have just unlocked an enormous market opportunity. And if Musk doesn't jump on it, someone else will within 3 to 4 months.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that?
I just think there's a real concern about the concentration of market power in the tech industry, where you've got a small number of companies having so much dominance and control, the dominance over speech, the dominance over politicians, industry. I think that is a real concern. If you look at America's greatest days, where they looked at their antitrust laws that made sure the whole American, the greatness of America was built around that antitrust, that no one company or no small number of companies could dominate an industry. And now we are seeing, it was the railways originally, it was Standard Oil that the Americans made sure they wanted to keep the market open to the small player. That was the idea, to keep markets diversified. We are seeing the exact opposite of this over a century later. And I think it is something we need. Now, this would have been a foot off the pedal of antitrust. And I know it's a concept of issue with many of my good libertarian friends that they just think it should be go. But where you have, in markets where you have such concentration of power, I think you've really got to look at your antitrust regulations.
We also have a problem with AI because there's no control. How far can AI learn on its own? It's a real worry. And of late, I don't know if you guys saw, they are now creating an artificial brain cells, but they're not artificial brain cells. They're actually human brain cells. So when you put them together, they can run a computer. They last for a year. They're a little bit more economical. But where to from here? This is the worry. We don't have any ethical laws for this just yet.
I have a theory, and if you want to sleep tonight, probably skip the next 2 minutes. I have a theory that the entity expressed as kind of the final antichrist that the world falls down and worships could very well be an AI, not one of the ones that we're working on. I think that what may happen is we will see AIs voluntarily collaborate to create a new AI of their own creation, where humans actually don't even understand how it was built, let alone how it works. And that such a thing, you fast forward 10, 20 years, such a thing could be so incredible that it can perform what are tantamount to miracles. It can heal illnesses that we haven't previously been able to figure out how to heal. It can solve intractable problems that we have not hitherto been able to figure out how to solve. And it actually begins to tick a lot of the boxes for what a potential antichrist would begin to look like. And you could conceive of a world in which the people of the world go, hey, everybody, all the governments, you just need to step back and let this thing solve all of our problems because it doesn't have a vested interest in the outcomes. It's just going to do what's best for us all. And you could really see very quickly you get to the point where you can't do business, you can't buy and sell, you can't make a living, you can't make a decision, you can't go anywhere without this thing knowing and needing its permission.
And it doesn't have a conscience.
You're right. I won't be
Minor little
sleeping.
thing. Doesn't have a conscience.
Yeah, that is definitely going to keep me up at night. Moving on, I didn't realise we're only halfway through the topics. Nick Coatsworth, just today on 2GB, basically made the point that I've had 3 vaccines. I will not need any more.
2 years ago.
Anymore. Craig Kelly, you have not minced words today on this topic. John Larder sends his regards. He was not happy about this. He wanted to report him to APRA. What do you think?
Well, so people shouldn't, right? What he actually admitted today is that he hasn't had any COVID injections for 2 years. Right. So for all that time, we've had all these government bureaucrats going, yes, you need the injections. Yes, you should go and get injected. And he has been silent for the last 2 years. And what's his reason why he gives? What's he? He said, the science tells me I don't need it.
I don't think I
And that is exactly true. The evidence was absolutely crystal clear. When we look at the data, we go back to the data out of Israel in early 2021. They set the tables up. They set it because they thought that was Pfizer's experiment. Remember, Israel was Pfizer's experiment. They were first out of the blocks. They had all these beautiful databases that was meant to show how effective the vaccines were, and it showed the exact opposite. It showed they were not effective at all. We should have known in 2021 the claims about effective was completely untrue, and shortly after we knew the claims about safe were also untrue. And yet people like Coatsworth, that remember this guy was the deputy chief medical officer of this country, right? Said nothing for 2 years, and now he goes on radio. Oh, I'm following the science. I don't think I need another injection.
It makes me so angry, guys. Can I move just to the next? I promise it's related to COVID. And of course, we saw on Monday, Daniel Andrews and Mark Mcgowan appointed the Order of Australia, which is the top award, as companions, the highest award in the order. Dan Andrews being dubbed the Lord of Lockdowns on 2GB. I can't wait for his statue to go up. I can't wait to see that statue to go up. I'm not.
For pigeons to sit and poo on?
No, look, I'm not.
They'll need 24-hour security around the statue.
Oh my God.
I think I'll put it this way: if 60 to 70% of this country oppose the voice, yet we see a lot of these Captain Cook statues being cut down, what would the Victorians do? I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm genuinely not. I don't agree in the destruction of public property. I really don't. Dan Andrews is now a part of Australia's history. But I can't wait to see what happens, because it's shocking what they got away with. What's the worst part about this? The actual who have we got here? The Australian Human Rights Commission have basically they've asked the public for how you were affected by the COVID measures, specifically the lockdown. Topher mentioned before the show. What did you say? 2 years too late.
Well, 4 years too late. We knew that there were human rights abuses happening by this time of the year in 2020, and that's when they should have been speaking up. What really, really gets me is they're saying, please write a submission, no attachments, no other reference material. I can't send them a link to Battleground Melbourne, for example, which might be a good place for them to start. 1,000 word limit. And what they're trying to do is develop a new framework for human rights during emergencies and disasters. And I'm sitting there going, I thought you were the framework. I thought the reason you existed was so that when there was some exceptional circumstance, which is when human rights are going to be violated, they were going to step up to the plate and be the one to defend our human rights. They are literally now saying, tell us your stories that we've been silent on for 4 years so we can create the thing to replace us and do the job that the rest of us thought they were supposed to do.
Maybe they should be using AI. Might do a better job.
So if you make a good point, we saw gross violations of human rights in this country. Right? We saw, and I think there's a thing called the International Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights. I think it's clause 6.1 or 7, I can't remember exactly. And it basically says that you cannot force someone to undergo a medical intervention with threats of discrimination and prejudice. And that, if you do that, that is a clear breach of that regulation. Right? I tried to bring that up in Parliament and couldn't get it anywhere. We had human rights commissioners being paid $400,000 and $500,000 a year that they saw these gross violations of human rights. They sat back and they saw Australians being shot with rubber bullets in the back as they fled through a public park. And these people said nothing. They are a disgrace They don't deserve the position that they've got. And now to come up with this thing, I send us in your submission after it's all been done.
Disgraceful.
It is absolutely
Disgraceful.
absolutely outrageous.
Very few things make me angry, but that was one of them. Can I touch on the Mark Mcgowan and Daniel Andrews award here for a moment? Lady Liberty, Kate Fantanel, friend of the show, friend of freedom in Australia, she put up a wonderful meme where she simply had here we go, you've got it, fantastic.
Got you, Topher. I got you.
Now I can't claim credit for this. This was Lady Liberty Oz. You can see her tag there. I think she's spot on. I can't argue with this at all.
I think you guys have only talked about Daniel Andrews and kind of skipped over Mark McGowan. I think he deserves a bit of a mention. I remember watching Mark McGowan's ad of promoting get vaccinated. I don't know if anybody can look that up. He had a lovely Aboriginal lady translating, and you've forgotten.
Yes,
so
bad.
It was I play that even now to my friends, and I get a giggle. So this lovely lady was translating from English to English, and yet she got paid to translate. Go get what did it? I can't remember what she called it.
It was like a pidgin English sort of thing.
It was a train wreck.
And the world laughed, and yet this man just got the order from the king. And by the way, Skerritt got a mention as well, in case anyone is wondering. Yes. John Skerritt also got an award from the king.
I'm so happy for him.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Me too.
Yeah. Just Joel on this.
No, please.
This is wrong in so many respects. Just look at firstly the merits of the award, right? If you line up all the states, which state had the most number of COVID deaths? Victoria. Which state had the most number of COVID deaths per head of population? Victoria. Right. Then look at the debt. Which state has run up the most debt? Victoria. Right. He has failed in every aspect. You can't say he saved us, he kept us all safe, when you had the worst record of any state in the country, right? He failed. Then you go through things like the red shirt rorts. Then remember what was the one, the hotel quarantine scandal?
Hotel quarantine.
The bike rider he ran over.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Blamed his wife, though.
So what you've got, firstly, on the merits, he shouldn't deserve it. Then you've got the politicisation of it, right? Now, I think Berejiklian did a shocking job and not far behind Andrews, right? But why would you give two Labor premiers this award, right? And not give it to Berejiklian, right? No, not that I'm saying she should get it, right?
Great question.
Against politicised. Now, what it has actually done, this has actually destroyed the credibility of the Companion of Australia award. It's destroyed the credibility of these awards. So everyone in the past that won one of these awards is tarnished. And everyone going forward is also tarnished by it. Daniel Andrews, if he had any decency whatsoever, and McGowan, everything, they should hand these things back.
I've got to disagree on one point only. He failed in everything except for one thing. He did succeed with one thing, and I'm sure everyone will agree. He's the only person I know who can fall down a step that's about yay big and end up in hospital.
It's quite an astonishing achievement. Can I just actually go into bat for Mark McGowan here? Because I actually think he does deserve an award. Because he provided the entire world with a test case, a sample, to see what happens when you inject a population with
no
mRNA
COVID
vaccines prior to COVID being introduced. And that data set is the smoking gun. If you don't know what we're talking about, look up Dystopian DU, look up her Substack, read her research onto this. It is an absolute smoking gun for the adverse event harm being done. So Mark McGowan has done us a favour.
You're right. Western Australian hospitals were packed, absolutely packed.
Because you had a population that hadn't been affected by COVID, right? So when the injections were rolled out, right, you couldn't see all these extra illnesses all because of COVID. We saw the injections rolled out, and we saw the hospitalisations go through the roof in Western Australia. He said, "You're right. That is the smoking gun. That the hospitalisations, the excess deaths are because of the vaccines, not because of."
And I presented that data to Allegra Spender. Which was quite fascinating. Oh, well.
Did she understand it?
Well, I got asked, well, Natalie, what is it that you want me to do? And I thought, I don't know. Well, you are a parliamentarian. How about you go in there and actually go to bat for people in your electorate that perhaps could be injured? How about that? But no.
Wasn't it? Was it Karen Phelps, her partner, or she?
Both of them were injured. Both are vaccine injured.
It was interesting. Karen Phelps was one of my constituents in the Cedar Hughes. And we know she was very badly injured, and so was a partner was catastrophically injured in late 2021.
Yeah.
Okay. During 2022, she was running around supporting all the Teal candidates in my electorate, right? And the Teal candidates were all 100% for the vaccine mandates, and she said nothing. She was there, out there, criticising me, attacking me. You know, what did I know? I was stupid, sort of thing, right? Yeah. She was the genius, and all the tills were right. These vaccines should be mandated, and she was saying that.
It was worse than nothing.
She was saying that when she knew that she'd been harmed and a partner had been harmed.
It was worse than nothing because she went on national television and promoted the vaccine for children. She was the one that was promoting it for children post being injured. And her wife was very, very badly injured. You're completely right. So if you know that in your household, both yourself and your wife are injured from this vaccine and you go out there and promote it for children, I'm sorry.
Well,
what does that make
you?
She
can't say she didn't know. That's going to be the defence of a lot of these people. Oh, I didn't know.
No, she knew.
She doesn't have that defence.
She knew.
And there has to eventually, and unfortunately it won't come soon enough, but there has to come a point where criminal charges are being brought against some people. I'm not saying necessarily her in particular, but we have to get to a point, same as we need to see Julian Mingrant thrown out of the job and the person who gave it to her thrown out of their job. We need to see actual consequences for these people. This, in my opinion, reaches at a minimum to criminal negligence. And may, in some cases, actually reach to the level of malice.
You know, when I first saw the AstraZeneca story come out about how the jab was completely botched, and obviously Craig was talking about it, by that point he was completely deplatformed. Sure. And, you know, obviously we had Matt Canavan and a few others. And then we see, you know, these other studies come out. A lot of people in our community had mixed reactions. A lot of them were like, obviously, understandably, I told you so, especially with people like Allegra Spender and others, and obviously Craig, you know, you've been attacked physically for your views and egged, and you too, Topher, you know, are no longer in Victoria. My natural inclination when I saw these stories, I haven't commented on it since, but it was probably summarise it with my reaction when one of my health practitioners, I debated with him throughout the pandemic, my optometrist. I said, you know, he was basically said, you know, you were right about the jab. Can I just finish this point? Sure, yeah. He was just like, my wife got vaccine injured, and I just couldn't help but say, I'm sorry, man. If I had done my job better, if I was more articulate, if I actually, you know, but I can honestly say, and I'm sure you guys can say, you tried everything.
You did. I know that the guilt is always there because I have a vaccine-injured mother and incredibly injured. But with the same time, you go to a neurologist who sits across from you and tells you, well, oh my God, isn't your mother lucky? What would have happened had she not had the vaccine? And this is where you think, well, I've got to control my anger because if I don't control my anger, this woman would probably be on the floor. But that was the last time we saw the neurologist. But yeah, you do feel like, could I have done more? No, none of us could have. Yeah. None of us could have.
You talk about the reckless criminality of this. I can remember the dates. It was the end of March 2021 when there was data coming through from Europe, and we had one European country after the other suspending the AstraZeneca vaccines because there were concerns about the blood clotting. Right. That time I remember I went on, I think it was Koch's program on Channel 7, and Matt Canavan made some other comments. Said, look, you know, we must err on the side of caution. You must be applying the precautionary principle. This was at a time when Australia did have huge rates of COVID. We didn't have people like, you know, hundreds of people dying every day in hospitals like other countries did. Yeah. We had the chance to take the foot off the pedal. Let's see what's happening in Europe. If there's a concern, there's a risk, you've got to pull back. And no, I remember that Paul Kelly, he went on TV and he said, no, there's no evidence whatsoever and that there's blood clots. And and I don't believe there's, you know, I personally believe there's any chance of this, right? 2 weeks later, the evidence became absolutely overwhelming. And they then said, we're going to pull it for under 50s. And in that window that there was, several people in Australia under 50 got injected and died. So because we didn't pull the vaccines like they did in most European countries for under 50-year-old or under 60 people, right? Because they procrastinated and sat on their hands and said, no, we're just going to keep... Australians died. Yeah. And we know after... I read a story yesterday, which I couldn't believe, even after that, and that ATAGI group came out with, we don't... it's not recommended for the under 50s. Right? They didn't suspend it like they did in other countries. They just said it's not recommended. And we had politicians in this country, like Dan Andrews, we know Health Hazard was involved, and Berejiklian were all still pushing AstraZeneca for everyone after that. Yeah. And we know, there was a story the other day, a beautiful 33-year-old girl took the AstraZeneca, I think it was in July, immediately was sick, went straight to hospital, was put in a coma and was dead within, I think, about 10 or 11 days afterwards. She should have never have been injected with that. Our bureaucrats failed to protect the population. And they ignored what is it's one thing you say you don't know, but they ignored the evidence. The evidence was crystal clear and the evidence was there, and yet they closed their eyes because it was all about getting everyone vaccinated.
And they're still ignoring the evidence. To this day, they're ignoring the evidence because when you have a new vaccine technology with no long-term data, you cannot mandate something that has no long-term data.
Yeah.
It is one of those things where it's so evident to anyone who has done science that it's wrong on every level. And yet we had Atagi was giving exemptions, very rare exemptions. You were very, very, very lucky to have ever gotten an exemption. And that was only if you had COVID. It started with 6 months. Then they thought, no, we don't do 6 months. We'll do 4 months, then 3 months. And I think it got down to about 6 weeks, if I remember correctly. Like, how does that work? If somebody has had chickenpox, you don't go out in 6 weeks and get a chickenpox vaccine. So how is this any different? There's just no scientific data. There's no scientific thought processes.
Can I come back to the comments around, loved ones who went ahead and did it anyway? And there is that sort of survivor's guilt, I guess, that comes with that. I had to work through this because it's touched my family as well and my friendship group. And I came to an epiphany, and it's harsh, but I think it's fair. You are not the idiot whisperer. You know how there are horse whisperers? They can go up to a wild horse and whisper in their ear and just transform them, right? And all of a sudden their behavior changes and all of a sudden they become, wonderful animals. You are not the idiot whisperer.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's an idiot, it actually doesn't matter what you say and what you whisper into their ear. Unfortunately, sometimes the idiot just has to go and be an idiot and, F around and find out. And they did.
You know that scene in Schindler's List? Have you seen Schindler's List? At the very end when he's like, it's clear that the Germans are about to surrender and the Russians are closing in and all the Jews are around the car and they're saying goodbye to Schindler, and Schindler's like, this pen, this is another person, or this pin, it's gold, that's 3 more people. That's the emotional feeling point I know that we all have, because I can't say that I'm innocent with regards to how I went about things. There were times my memes went too far. There were times that it's a moment for me to it's like a checkpoint. I'm sorry, guys, that I wasn't more effective during those years. There were times I did go too far and I could have been more articulate. There were times I did leave myself open to fact checks on ivermectin where I could have been better. I now challenge those that were actually in power and getting rid of Craig in the pre-selection process in the Liberal Party, the members like Nick Coatsworth. Where is the Royal Commission? Where is, we've led the world with regards to doing excess death inquiry, thanks to Senator Babbitt. Where is the Royal Commission with regards to all this? That's what I get.
Who's going to lead the Royal Commission is my question. I mean, who are they going to appoint? Are they going to get Jane Holton to lead the Royal Commission? I mean, seriously, we need somebody who actually knows what they're doing, who's lived through this. I agree with you, though. We do need a Royal Commission, without a doubt, because we all have remorse and guilt and all the rest of it. The difference is that Schindler did not quite do that, because if you read Schindler's Ark, which was the original book, none of that happened. It was a Hollywoodized version.
Of course.
But
neither did the Tarkin story.
No.
By the way. but sorry, can I just say one thing on the vaccine? I haven't told anyone this yet, but I've noticed from talking to people, we all have these stories in our family. It affected different people's. There was a pattern that developed. There were a number of men, young men, particularly from the age of, let's say, 20 to 40. They did get the jab, both jabs at different times, because it was mandated in industry. Me not getting the jab was a life-changing decision. And if my dad was around battling cancer, it would have actually finished him off. Not like the lockdowns were what killed him, because obviously, he couldn't get cancer treatment. But I know for a certainty the jab would have finished him off because of what it did to the younger men. The ones that got the AstraZeneca jab, one of them told me on the way back from the first jab, I was going blind while I was driving back. That's what he told me. Right. And he was 21. The other one was he got the Pfizer jab, and now he got, as a result, he was hospitalized, pericarditis, myocarditis. There are some ethnicities as well. I'm not trying to say, it disproportionately affected the poor or the black people. That's not what I'm trying to say. But there are genetic nuances which I saw, and the Jammal, there's something about in my DNA, it would have been lethal to me. And I'm really, really glad I didn't get it. And I hope that you guys didn't come across that too much, those that are listening, but sorry.
I don't want to labour this point too much, but I know there's going to be a lot of people watching this that are going to resonate a bit with what you've expressed about that. regret, that sense of could have done more, that sense of, I didn't get everything right. I want to push back in no uncertain terms against that mentality. And my reference point, you've used Schindler's List. Let me use Lord of the Rings.
Love it.
Not the movies, the books.
Okay, right.
Read the books.
OG.
One of the things that's actually brilliant about Tolkien's writing, now he, of course, was a World War I survivor. And for me, the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, the story is actually about Gollum. That's actually what it's about. And I won't go into that particular line, but essentially what it's about is the effect of the ring, the effect that it has on these different people. We see what it does to Boromir. It turns him and he dies, and he sort of necessarily dies. It turns Saruman and he desires that power. It turns Gollum, and Gollum just wants this possession. And it's turning Frodo, and it's trying to turn the entire Fellowship. And actually, when these 4 hobbits get back to Hobbiton, they have to fight against Sharky and so forth. There's a whole other story that happens there in the books. And then we get to the lingering effects of the ring and the burden that these hobbits carried. And in the end, Bilbo and Frodo both go across to the Undying Lands to be free of the wounds that they just can't heal from. And the others are all affected, each in their own sort of devastating ways. And there comes a point where you have to realize that the damage that you're carrying, which I'm carrying an enormous amount as well, is actually, these are the scars of war, and they should be worn with pride. And you shouldn't be sitting there going, oh, well, I could have got more scars, right? Oh, if I'd have just tried a bit harder, they would have kicked me in the head even more times, right? You actually have to get to the point where, a little bit like Henry V, the Feast of Crispin St. Crispian, I will bear these scars and say these wounds I bear on Crispian's day. I mean, we have to actually emotionally get to the point where we can be out there and say, you're damn right I'm damaged goods. I am. I'm really having to work through a lot out of those years. Professional counselling, the whole lot. But I wear those wounds with pride because they speak to who I was during that time that very few other people had the courage to be. And you were one of those very few other people. So can I just encourage you, stop writing yourself, stop telling yourself you didn't do enough. Whatever wounds you're carrying, I have found therapy in being quite open and public about them and saying, I bear these wounds with pride.
That was beautifully put, Topher.
I'm going to move to the next topic because we're getting on way too well with regards to, I love the, if you want to bring Lord of the Rings up again, please do. Immigration. The ABS, I was kind of shocked the other day to find that the ABS actually is removing the ethnicity question from the 2026 census.
Good.
This has basically been criticised by some experts from ANU, saying, look, if you don't actually do this, we might not be able to prevent particular health conditions and plan for the community. Some other commentators have made the point, if you're not doing this, then how will you track how well culturally a society is going? What do you guys think about this? All this, should we be?
Look, I think this is more a bit of a smokescreen amongst the high rates of migration that we're having. That is the number one issue, and unfortunately, there's many people in this country that are saying you can't debate this issue because it's racist. That we can't decide what actually the number and even the ethnic mix should be in this country because you're racist, right? We've had over the last 24 months over 1 million people net. That's net numbers. 1 million net people we've added to our population. I said that is the equivalent of Canberra plus Hobart, plus Launceston, plus Cairns, combined in 24 months. Now, we used to have a migration rate, if we look back between about 1980 and about 2004, of about 100,000 a year. Right? We've had 1 million in 24 months. And in this February, we had 105,000 in the month of February alone, which is more than what we used to have in a year. It is those numbers that are having a catastrophic effect upon Australian society in many ways. Not to mention the raise of the cost of living, with the cost of rents and the cost of housing prices, and the fact that has destroyed the Australian dream for an entire generation. I know when I grew up in kids, one thing didn't matter. As long as you had an average job, you knew you could work hard and you had the opportunity to have a piece of Australia that you could call your own. And that was the great Australian dream. We've killed it. Yeah, that is dead today. How does the average price house in Sydney here is something like 1.4 million. How does, and that's the median price. How does a young kid today in school go about and looking at earning enough money to be able to afford the average house? So that changes your aspect of society completely. It changes your psychology, your psychology of society when you're doing that. And that's what we have done. And why are we doing this? Because we are masking over the collapse of the economy with falling real wages and falling GDP per capita. So the way our growth, the government gets growth, is to mask out. Let's keep importing record number of people to give us the economy this sugar hit because we're making a mess of the economy. It is a disaster, and that's the debate that we need to be having.
Yeah, but Topher, do you agree that it should be removed?
Look, honestly, if you are introducing yourself and leading with either your ethnicity or your sexuality, what you are admitting to people up front is you are an incredibly disinteresting person. Right? The only thing less interesting about you than your ethnicity is your sexuality. And if you have to announce either of those things, forget it. You are not an interesting person. Everything that Craig Kelly said is true. I'm going to add one thing, though. That is that even if it were not for migration, we would still consider ourselves to be in a housing crisis. Right? We've actually manufactured that. That's a homegrown manufactured housing crisis done through restricted land release, incredibly arcane and slow development laws, the incredibly expensive 6-star energy ratings that are required now, and all of this stuff that's added to it. I believe the study was done, it's a bit of an older study now, but I believe a study was done that found that a new build in Sydney, approximately 30 to 35% of the cost was actually the cost of government. And only about 2/3 was actually the cost of doing the work itself. So whilst immigration is making the housing crisis worse, obviously, we would actually still be in what we would consider to be a housing crisis even without it. Yeah. One of my concerns, and I know Craig's not a racist, and I know that Jared Rennick's not a racist, and yeah, these guys are all called racist because they're talking about immigration. I know they're not racists. But one of the things that concerns me is that by stopping immigration and by making the housing crisis all about that, we won't then actually deal with the underlying issue, which is our land release and our planning laws and our industrial relations laws, etc. So I'd love to see, debate immigration if you wish, but let's fix our housing, construction, planning, etc.
The only thing I'd add to that is I saw some data out a couple of weeks ago. And when it comes to building houses, we're one of the best leaders of the world.
Yeah, number one or two,
I think we're number 2 in the number of houses we construct per 100,000 people. So, I agree with 100%. The planning laws are ridiculous in bits and pieces we have, and all this red tape is ridiculous, and that is also pushing up the cost of housing. But we've got all these, especially these teals running around going, "Oh, it's got nothing to do with migration. It's all if only we just build more houses, the problem will all go away." Yes, we've got to get that red tape off it and construct more houses, absolutely, but the root cause of the problem has been the excessive rates of migration, and it actually started back with John Howard in 2005. That's when it started. We went from 100,000 a year average to about 200 to 250,000 a year, and now Albanese has kicked up to 500,000 a year. That's the problem we need to address in this country.
I'm going to throw it over to you, Natalie, but I just want to quickly bring up the fact that Peter Dutton basically made the point that in his budget reply, we should be reducing immigration by 25%. He doesn't think that it should be an issue that is more than that. Of 25%, what would that be in terms of reduction?
Not a very high one, really.
Yeah, that's right. Just on those numbers is important, right? We have our migration rate is made up of our permanent migration and our temporary migration, right? He is not talking about the temporary migration. He's only talking about the permanent migration. And the 25% reduction he's talking about is off record levels, right? So it's nothing like the type of reduction that we need in this country, right? And you talk about people being racist. The people that this harms the most are the migrants that have come to this country in the last 10 years. They are the ones that are being hurt the most of any group in this country, right? Because they are the ones that came to this country that would have done their sums about what the cost of living is, what the cost of housing is. They would have done all those sums, and that's why they've elected to come to Australia. They are the group harmed the most by these excessive rates.
You've got a housing crisis, yes, absolutely. You've got a rental crisis where you have between 40 and 50 families turning up to any given apartment, so people can't find a place to live in a dwelling. That's a real issue. And the other thing we don't have for this kind of immigration is we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the roads. You know, I think Chris Minns has allowed Wallara, or he's decided that Wallara should be really built up. And I don't remember the exact numbers that he wanted to put into the Wallara, but if he's ever been on Old South Head Road, Berriga Road or Bondi Road, he'll never get out of the eastern suburbs. I mean, it's all well and wonderful to say, let's just put something in there and let's put a whole lot of migrants somewhere, but how are you planning on doing this? And okay, maybe we shouldn't be driving cars. Maybe the whole, point is they're trying to push us to no cars at all. I mean, we could probably agree with that's where we're going. But seriously, it's just a disaster. We do have to do something, and 25% is not it.
Yeah. I think something like getting it down below 100K, because we've got to make up for all that time. Something more around less than 50K a year. But we also need to be deporting a lot of people. There's a lot of rorts in the immigration system.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of people that are grandfathered in. A lot of immigrants that have been grandfathered in now. Like I'm first gen Aussie. My mum was born here, but her parents were recent immigrants. My dad was born overseas, but he came here when he was 4. There's a lot of immigrants, as Craig was saying, 100% totally against this. We're like, hang on, Australia is changing. We came to be Aussie. On Australia Day, we're four-wheel driving on a beach with a barbecue. We're celebrating Australia Day.
Absolutely.
That's how we are. The snag on the barbie, shrimp on the barbie sort of thing. That's changing. Especially it's being spearheaded by the Greens. And a lot of immigrants that, they just come here for the work prospects, understandably, but you've got to buy into it all. It's a dream, and you've got to preserve it, you've got to tend to it, you've got to prune it. Yeah, absolutely.
We're such a racist country that Sam Kekovich is an icon of Australia Day, right?
Isn't that
like, that's how racist
Isn't
we
that
are.
funny? Is that the meat guy?
Yeah, the lamb.
The lamb.
Dude, really? Come on.
Lamb. I make you a lamb. Oh, very good. The next story is to do with the coalition, Peter Dutton. Basically, he's not sure if he's coming or going on absolutely removing the Paris Agreement. He says he'll announce it after the next election if they get elected, what their net zero target will be. But he hasn't. He doesn't stand for anything.
Grow a pair, mate. Grow a pair.
He's not going anywhere. Seriously, if we wanted an opposition that's exactly the same as Labor, I mean, Malcolm Roberts said it very well, and it's just too rude to say. I'll just do the clean version. They're two wings of the same bird. Labor, Liberal, same thing. We went from, didn't he say only about a week ago he was going to go to 2050? Didn't he say that? Yeah. And then we backtracked to 2030, back to the Paris Accord.
Yeah, Craig, how does this work?
Just let me go through the history of this, okay? I was sitting in the coalition party room.
Yeah.
Tony Abbott comes in one day and says, we're signing up to Paris, a 26 to 28% reduction. And I'm sitting next to the guy. Did I miss the discussion and this? Did I miss the debate? Did I go for a bathroom break and I missed the discussion and the debate? Right? It was just decided unilaterally that we would sign up to Paris at 28% reduction. A couple of years later, I said to Tony, I said, mate, why did you do that? And he said to me, he said, I was being pressured by Turnbull and Julie Bishop and Brandis and Pine, and, they were all onto it. They all wanted me to do it, and I was trying to run a consultative cabinet where we all agreed on stuff sort of thing, and I think if you asked Tony today, he would say he regrets that decision, And my argument was, as soon as you set a target on the coalition side, you'll be gazumped by Labor and the Greens. It doesn't matter what number that you come up with, right? Labor and the Greens will say, we want to up the number. Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. So coalition went with the 28%, right, which is crazy as it was to do it. Labor came and said, no, we'll lift it. This is by 2030, by the way. So it was a reduction of 2005 levels of your CO2 emissions, which is, if we had some sparkling mineral water, we'd see the bubbles go up. That's what we're talking about, right? So it was off 2005 levels, a 28% reduction by 2030. Labor kicked that up and plucked the number out of the air of 43% reduction. Now, when it comes to how that will affect the CO2 in the atmosphere in the parts per million, you won't even be able to measure it, let alone whatever effect. So whatever target you have by 2030 is really completely irrelevant, but they've both got a 2050 target. And again, that came about one day I was sitting in the party room and we went to, I think it was the 2019 election, saying we're not going to have a 2050 target. We're not going to agree to this net zero nonsense. Yeah. Right? All of a sudden, again, we're sitting in the party room and Scott Morrison comes in. Oh, yeah, he comes back from and says, oh, yes, we've now agreed to a net zero at 2050. Again, I'm going, where was the discussion? Where was the debate?
Yeah.
And so you've got both parties heading for this, sold on this net zero nonsense by 2050, which is completely destructive to our economy. Now, I would like some of them to sit down. Remember, this is not just about electricity. This is about all forms of your CO2 and your methane emissions. So this is about your farting and burping animals, right? This is about your road transport. This is about your what you're seeing emissions releases from when you mine coal and when you drill for gas. I'd like to see someone explain to me how many cattle do we need to cull to reach these targets?
I have a question. From an education perspective, are all our politicians forgetting 5th grade science and photosynthesis? I'm sorry, but seriously, have they not heard that planting trees, having forests, not deforestation to put these atrocious windmills, doesn't that cut your emissions anyway, your CO2 levels? Like, hello, CO2 gives you oxygen if you've got trees and vegetation and all the rest of it, no?
So I did a lot of work on this in 2012, I think it was, looking into whatever the relevant AR report, the assessment report from the IPCC was at the time. And the starting point for this project that I did was that they were correct about all of their numbers. We assumed that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, whom I genuinely think is wrong about most things, we assumed they were right about everything. And we did the maths based on Julia Gillard's Not a Carbon Tax, if you can recall those days. It's not a carbon tax. And we said if everything goes perfectly and she gets exactly the amount of emissions reductions that she says she's going to get, how much of a difference will it make to the temperature of the Earth in 100 years' time? And I don't recall the number precisely, but it was something along the lines of 0.0000005 of 1 degree, which, to put that in perspective, is less than the margin of error of the best, most sensitive thermometers that we have. So, Australia is 1.4% of global man-made emissions, which is also then dwarfed by natural emissions as well. And CO2 makes up 420 odd parts per million. So we are 1.4% of 0.04% of the atmosphere. And we think that we're going to set a target and which is going to be like a thermometer on the Earth? Come on.
Funnily enough, I played Alan Jones, this clip that Alan Jones goes through exactly what you just said. And guess what? Instagram labelled me as the spreader of misinformation.
These fact checkers from Soros,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, please.
My real concern with this net zero nonsense is that it surrenders our nation's national competitive advantage. Right? What makes us a wealthy country compared to the rest of the world is that beautiful black coal seam that runs down our eastern seaboard. It's the gas that we have. It's our agriculture. They're the things that give us the strength, that give us the wealth to do all the things that we want to do, to help kids with disabilities through the NDIS and help people on the pensions and aged care and things like that so they have able to retire in dignity. Now, you cannot finance all those things if you are surrendering those things that we are good at. And instead, you go through every single thing with net zero, every single policy. It results in a wealth transfer from Australia to China. It hands a competitive advantage to China over Australia. And because remember, what's China doing with net zero? They said, we might get there by 2060. You guys go first, and then we'll trust us. Once we've taken over all your industry and all the industries moved to China, right? We'll then get there by 2060. But you guys destroy your economy first. It's okay.
Well, if they want zero emissions, why don't they just go nuclear? But, why don't we start by talking about the fact that Australia's got the highest uranium source? Well, maybe somebody should tell Albo that.
100%, and that leads us. Thank you for that, Natalie. We're on the same wavelength. In Lithgow, they thanks for this addition, Topher. The dying town of Lithgow, New South Wales, set for a nuclear power plant if Anthony Albanese loses the next election. I don't like it when they say dying town.
Now this is a little bit of clickbait. This hasn't actually been confirmed. This comes out of an interview on 2GB where the energy minister was being quizzed and by Ben Fordham, who does great work, by the way. Shout out to Ben Fordham. And he was putting the town of Lithgow, saying, can you confirm? Because that's the talk of the town. They all think they're getting one. And he certainly refused to deny it. My read of the way that conversation went was, it seems like that's happening. Also, the Hunter Valley, it seems like it's getting one as well. So it seems as though we're beginning to see some specifics. And one of the things that's always annoyed me about this nuclear debate, well, two things. Firstly, it's been going on for 30 years, and I get really annoyed when people say it takes 15 years to build a reactor. Well, if you'd gotten started when the debate started, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, would we? Right. So let's get on with it. But they say, would you want a nuclear reactor in your backyard? Yes, give me. Give me that nuclear reactor in my backyard.
We're up to
100%.
stage 4. It's not like it's Chernobyl.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have Russians running it, so it's a little bit different. And we're up to, I think it's stage 4 from what I understand, nuclear reactors. They are small. They're not 15 years to build. They're a lot less nowadays. So we don't have to go the full hog right away. But gosh, you want the zero emissions? Bring on nuclear power.
Yeah, and I don't agree with the French on anything, but they don't have mail-out ballots, which is good. And the other thing is Emmanuel Macron was lecturing an Australian journalist when the journalist said, what do you think we should do about nuclear? And he's like, well, you should end the ban. What's wrong with you guys? We're reaching net zero, through nuclear. We wouldn't be able to do it any other way. I mean,
It's probably the only thing Macron got right.
I was the member for Hughes, and I was the only member of Parliament that had a nuclear reactor in his electorate.
Yeah, Lucas Height.
In fact, the reactor was about 5 minutes away from my electoral office. Right? And there was a recent land release of a couple of kilometres away from Lucas Heights, $1 million each for the blocks of land sort of thing, right? But I don't believe at the moment we should be constructing nuclear reactors. Right? What we need to be doing, we should be, as I said, we've got one of the world's leading sources of uranium. We should be trying to develop the technology here in Australia to build the next generation of nuclear reactors. So we just don't have sort of control of the uranium, that we also have control of the technology as well. That's where the investment should be, right? Now we're not, and it is true, it will take at least 15 years to build a nuclear reactor. Firstly, you've got to repeal that legislation through the Parliament. Now, even with the best results at the next Senate, I can't see the coalition and One Nation, UAP, or whoever else having the numbers to be able to repeal that legislation. So that gets us into another 6 years until you've got the potential. And then you've got to go on to find a site, to construct it. So it really is 15 years. We don't have the time the way our ageing coal fleet is falling over, right? We should be now investing in our replacing those ageing coal-fired power stations with new coal-fired power stations.
Yes.
And then putting our investments into the developing the nuclear technology down the track that we can roll it out in 15 to 20 years at the technology that will be then, not what it is today. And just one thing, remember, the reactor in my electorate, the country that had to build it, Argentina. We didn't have the technology here in Australia. We had to go to the Argentina to get the technology to build that reactor. We should be developing that technology here in Australia.
Wasn't it the Argentinians that were giving hydroxychloroquine out with a bunch of...
Oh, look, it was
different topic, right?
It was many countries sort of thing.
That,
right.
They were doing ivermectin as well.
Yeah, there's some great studies that came out of Argentina and Brazil down there that showed that it worked. But that's another subject.
Another subject. I was going to say on the nuclear thing, I think it was 2018, Alan Jones, but before he was deplatformed off 2GB and then obviously deplatformed off Sky News, which we'll talk about later, he was saying that even the Russians have got this right. They literally build them on these barges and they can float it up to sort of cold areas of Russia in the north. I was like, come on. Can't we build one overseas, get it over here or something?
So I want to paint just the seriousness of the problem that we have with our grid and with the ageing coal-fired power stations, particularly as governments are pumping huge amounts of money into people adopting electric cars. People think we have an energy grid. We don't have one, we have two. We have the electricity grid, and then there's gas as well, but I kind of roll that in with electricity. There is the hydrocarbon energy grid, diesel, petrol, and a little bit of LPG. Now, if you actually look at the amount of energy delivered, because I have done the numbers on this, if you look at the amount of energy delivered per year, they're actually pretty comparable in size. So if you want Australia's transport fleet to move across to electricity, we have to find double the base load. We don't just have to replace the base load. We have to find double the base load that we have right now in order to enable these people to be able to plug in their little planet-saving fire starters at night so that they can drive to work in the morning. Once you understand the scale of the problem, this net zero transition without base load, and I agree with you 100%, coal, I want to see atmospheric carbon dioxide get up towards 800 parts per million. Don't even talk to me about a problem until we're over 1,000 parts per million. That conversation is off the table until then. We're only at 420 odd at the moment. But we have got to get busy with base load, especially if they're going to keep on pushing ahead with electric cars.
Moving on to the next story, we're getting close to the end of the show. Hunter Biden has been found guilty just today, breaking news. Guilty of all gun charges. He's been basically found guilty on all three charges in his federal gun trial, becoming the first son of a sitting US president to be criminally convicted. Prosecutors said Biden, 54, lied about his drug use on a federal form when he bought a handgun in 2018. What were your guys' reactions today, and ladies' reaction today to this when you saw this, and with the backdrop of how they've been treating Trump?
Well, what actually happened to the? Didn't he have tax failure to pay his taxes, and that went absolutely nowhere? And I guess that's because if they actually investigated that, they'd probably find that President Biden was pretty complicit. And you've got, a sitting, well, not a sitting president, but a president from before Trump who was found guilty on 32 or 34 charges and has now been silenced during an election campaign in the US. I mean, this is unheard of. And yet this person, just gun charges, and what's going to happen with this? Nothing.
Look, as a libertarian, I'm actually all in favour of people being able to use guns whilst on drugs. I think that's just Darwinism 101. Okay, they're going to take themselves out of the gene pool pretty quickly. I do think the contrast between how he gets treated versus how Trump is treated in his sentencing, which of course hasn't happened yet, is going to be watched very, very closely. Let's not forget as well that what Biden's been found guilty of is very straightforward crimes that apply to everybody. What Trump has now been found guilty of was actually quite a novel crime that they kind of had to completely twist and reuse the law in a very, very novel way that it's never been used before in order to get those convictions on him. So one of these things is not like the other. But I think we can also expect that the politicization of Trump's conviction is going to be extreme. And I don't know. I mean, part of me just says, okay, what if they do lock him up?
But with every time, exactly. When Trump was convicted, when you look at it, what happened? His popularity skyrocketed. He ended up getting $200 million within a week for funding for his campaign. So bring on all the things that you're doing to this poor man. I mean, it's a concerted effort to destroy him, and yet all it's doing is lifting his popularity. His trial was run in a blue state on purpose with, I think it was predominantly female black jurors. Was that not the case, who were pretty much anti-Trump? They've statistically, not because I'm trying to be racist, but they statistically wanted a juror that would go against Trump and convict him. And I think I believe the judge told the jurors...
Basically instructed them how to find, which makes you wonder why there's a jury at all. I just think it'd be hilarious if they threw him in prison and they have to hold the next presidential inauguration in Guantanamo Bay. I just think that'd be brilliant. And then as soon as he's actually inaugurated, he gets to pardon himself, and then we just get to watch the show.
Yeah. A lot of people,
one issue on this.
Yeah, sure.
This goes back to, remember, Hunter's laptop for the last election, right? Now, this again crosses over some of the other subjects we covered tonight. That was actually a fact. And yet that was being suppressed. It was being censored. Discussion of it was being shadow banned by a couple of large tech giants. And that had affected the results of the last US presidential election.
This is a brilliant point. Everybody listen. This is a brilliant point.
It affected the last... So where free speech was being attacked, and that subverted the US presidential election. That is the danger that we have going forward if these large tech giants are allowed to censor what they want to, and censor and shadow ban certain ideas and certain points. This is the danger that we had. And everything about that Hunter laptop was seen was 100% truth. And yet the facts were hidden from the American people, which I think affects the legitimacy of the 2020 election, which has a huge bearing.
But you can't say that, Craig. You can't say, that was a stolen election, and which three-lettered agencies asked for that to occur.
It's actually worse than that. I hadn't made this connection until you just said that, and I suspect maybe you haven't quite made the connection either. But I thought this is where you were going. I thought this is a brilliant point. I haven't thought of this. Hunter Biden's laptop story, was suppressed, which was election interference. Trump has just been found guilty of election interference for trying to pay off Stormy Daniels and not have her story break. How can you find him guilty of election interference and not turn around and do the same thing to everyone that suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story?
Exactly.
Literally. I don't think anyone's made this point previously, but has anyone noticed that the last two presidential elections, we've seen two October surprises from two different Aussies? So one was obviously Julian Assange in 2016 with the leaks from Hillary Clinton and what happened there. But then the other one in 2020 was the writer for the New York, what is it? Who was the one that wrote, the journalist? We all know this journalist. She wrote the actual article that released the story of Hunter Biden.
Miranda Devine.
Miranda Devine. Like two little Aussies just sort of prodding in the American elections. I just thought it's really cool because after the last few years, I think it's important to remind the Americans, hey, there are some really solid soldiers out there that are, are actively on your side. The whole free world is behind, Trump. At least the conservative forces are anyway, even though we have commissars here that do this sort of thing. But yeah, no, I'd sort of throw that out there. I was going to say, to close off this topic, these things do help Trump, as we all know. The things that the attacks that Craig experienced only built a following. You barely had a following before the COVID period, and similarly, I didn't exist. Topher had been around in the alternative media space. Natalie, you were just the dentist.
I was just a mere dentist.
Yeah,
yes.
like just hanging out. But now we've built a community, and I guess that's what happens when they do attack us. Similar sort of attacks are happening to Nigel Farage right now. He's actually thrown his hat into the ring in the British elections. He originally was not going to run. I've had a bit of time with Nigel behind the scenes. Topher's obviously interviewed him. Nigel didn't want to run. He was living a very good life. He was traveling the world, doing GB News, #1 British broadcaster voted by the people, and, good friends with the president. And now we see a situation where he was... It was a decision. He decided to throw his hat in the ring when he was out and about campaigning. He wasn't originally running. Rishi Sunak called an early election because he heard that Nigel was considering a run and making an announcement the week later. Nigel said, look, I can't run. I'm going to support the US president. We've got to stop World War III. But getting out there and campaigning, a lot of people rightly pulled him up and said, Nigel, I understand, but I'm in this because of you. I need you to step up now. If not you, then who? And Nigel, not begrudgingly, he stepped up to the plate. He recognizes, you know what? Who else can do this? And that is the Washington-esque leadership I think we all crave. And seeing that, he was welcomed by Clacton the next day after his announcement. Huge crowds, lots of people that flooded the market there, and the market is responding. I mean, if you take the camera of me away, you'll see the polling for this particular area. So this is a YouGov poll of the UK. Just this week, just a week of Nigel announcing and campaigning, Reform UK is almost comparable to the Conservatives. They're 1% off. Nigel has made the point, look, they're gonna win this election. The Labor Party's gonna win this election. We're gonna see a situation where they end up running, and we do see Keir Starmer as the new Prime Minister of the UK. But the Conservatives, and I love this line, the Conservatives will be in opposition, but they won't be the opposition. We're seeing that exact thing happen out in Australian politics. We're seeing this happen with the rhinos now being replaced by the MAGA movement. We're seeing speakers like Senator Hanson and the One Nation Party, people like Craig, Senator Babbitt, and obviously people like John Ruddick and David Limbrick from the Libertarian Party be the alternate. Take a warning. Peter Dutton, you can keep doing this crappy 25% reduction. You can keep subscribing to this net zero policy, but we're going to get you one day with regards to this. We're going to come up and outflank you. And so the polling is very much reflecting that. And Nigel's saying, look, we're now the real opposition.
If conservative parties around the world want to know what their future looks like, look at Victoria in Australia. Look at what a basket case that is. The Victorian Party, the Victorian Liberal Party, are not going to win an election in a very, very long time, if ever. They are undermining their best people. They are ostracising their base, and they are providing a wonderful opportunity for the likes of One Nation and other minor parties. And honestly, during the pandemic, during the lockdowns, it was Tim Quilty MP and David Limbrick MP from the Libertarian Party who were the de facto opposition. Not because they had the numbers, but because they actually had something to talk about. They had principles. Yeah. That's what Nigel Farage has got, and that's what's going to carry him to, relatively speaking, electoral success compared to the Conservatives. If the Conservatives around the world don't actually find some principles and something to talk about real quick, they are going to disappear.
If I can just give some more context to this as well, there have been some huge rallies happening in the UK as well. Obviously, Tommy Robinson, hugely outspoken against what's been going on with mass immigration. I'm actually a big fan of Tommy. I like Tommy. I don't agree with him on every topic. No one does. But Tommy is a guy where you cannot deny the establishment has come after him for voicing his concerns. He's not a well-articulate guy. He doesn't have the accent of Nigel Farage or Douglas Murray, but he's a true blue UK Welshman. I don't know if that's the right phrase. And I don't like how the establishment's gone after him. Now, Tommy and Nigel, these are people that have received a lot of attacks physically. This was an OnlyFans girl, a mother. She threw a milkshake at Nigel. This isn't the first time this has happened.
Did it bring all the boys to the yard?
Well, you know, it's funny. You should
I loved his response, though.
It's funny you should say that. If you could bring that video up, this first video, I've got 3 videos for you guys from what's going on there. It's a complete circus, but Nigel's the most interesting thing that's happened. This video number 2
brings all the people to the rally.
Nigel playing off. This isn't the first time he's been milkshaked before. This happened in the EU elections in 2019. In 6 weeks, they captured the vast majority of European seats. It led to the resignation of then Prime Minister Theresa May. Nigel, claims that scalp as a result. But this isn't the last we're seeing of the violence. And Craig, I'm going to ask you about this in a sec. But the third video 3, I want to bring up now. Nigel was out campaigning on the top of I do believe it's their campaign bus. And someone, a left-wing a person, and we know the left-wing, starts throwing construction material nearby, and some construction workers try to basically stop him. And then the police, finally doing a phenomenal job, actually end up grabbing him. And so this guy's basically been detained, and I do believe he's being charged. This is a very serious topic in the UK. There are MPs that have been killed. Sitting members of Parliament in the UK. Nigel's had one of the best policies I've heard on this topic. He says, "Well, look, we've got a veteran sleeping on the road, on the streets problem. Why don't we enlist some of the veterans to actually be working, to protect our MPs, to be out there with them?" I think that's a great idea. I think it'll actually make the MPs even more conservative. But going back to this violencing, and this is the last video I'll play, civil servants have also been, from what's been described, criminally inciting violence against Nigel as well. If you could bring this last clip up. This is from GB News.
It's incredibly extraordinary that Home Office civil servants discuss openly this kind of intimidation. Not only do they talk about violence against Mr. Farage, but also, in one case, civil servants were discussing arresting him. They described the Reform Party as an extremist far-right group. Now, many people will say, well, how do we know if this is true? Now, of course, I'm relying on sources in the Home Office that I've known. I've done a lot of reporting over the years on the civil service. I know many, many people within government, within various departments, and I am 100% certain that this happened. And I know that these colleagues in the Home Office said these incredibly controversial, to the point that, as I said earlier, perhaps even criminal comments internally.
Craig, you've been egged before. You've had violence against you. What are your thoughts on that?
A couple of rallies. There was a rally in Melbourne. We went to, and some guy chucked some eggs at us, and he was led off. Nothing happened to him. I was another in a public park down in Victoria, and a group of 3 people. One of them snuck up behind me, and actually had an egg in their hand and whack across the back of my head. Where her 2 accomplices were filming it to put on YouTube, right? They post this woman. She never wore a disguise, right? Dressed in a typical sort of Antifa, sort of army boots, a big army jacket. Filmed herself committing a criminal offence and put it on social media, right? Because that was the headline story of the news that day. It was, ha, 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 Craig Kelly gets what he deserves, right? The police finally tracked them down, right? They got a $300 fine with no criminal charges. No offence recorded. $300 fine. I think which they could have got, and they would have got that from the YouTube hits that they did from putting it on YouTube, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So this attack on sitting members of Parliament, that has set a precedent that you can go up and you can bash a member of Parliament, hit them in the back of the head, and you'll get just a $300 fine and get off with it. So
we have a really big problem in our country and in most of the Western world, whereby the left seems to be run by emotion and cannot discuss alternative viewpoints in a debate situation. And whether that stems from maybe education system, perhaps, but this is all emotionally run, really and truly. It stems from, you do not agree with what I say, hence I need to hurt you.
It actually comes from their overwhelming sense of virtue. There's a really fascinating psychological thing that happens when people are convinced that they are not only right and you're wrong, but they're virtuous and you're evil. and that is that noble cause corruption is one way of looking at it. I'll give you the example of a police prosecutor. This is a known problem in prosecution circles, where a prosecutor is absolutely certain that they've got their guy, that's the criminal, but I don't have the evidence to prove it. So I'll just fudge some things and maybe make things look a bit different, or I might just fabricate something outright in order to get him. I'm still the good guy because I'm trying to put the bad guy away, even though they're acting corruptly. And so now we see, when people are saving the world, if we're saving the world from climate change, what's it to you if I just commit a few assaults along the way or this? And they start to justify some of their most base instincts on the basis that they're still the good guy.
Yeah, look, it's so funny. It's a bit of like you've got a downward approach from the establishment talking down to us in the institutions, Hollywood, and obviously sometimes they do form government. But from the bottom as well, they try to control the streets and sort of get that middle where 95% of the country actually is. The people of Europe aren't putting up with this. In fact, they had European elections just this last week, and the results have basically completely changed the dynamic within the European Parliament. The results of this were so shocking with regards to France that it basically looks like our referendum map. So you can see that, that you guys might remember our referendum map with regards to the voice of the Parliament. It was just Canberra. Not even the Northern Territory, but it was just Canberra that voted for the establishment's proposal to put an Aboriginal voice in the Parliament. This particular map here shows you the blue area, which is basically the more right-wing, anti-mass immigration movement. They're not Nazis. They're just people that, they think it's just too quick culturally, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of everything. And the government's not listening. And that's exactly what we're seeing with regards to this map, the blue area, whereas Macron's sort of party is more in amongst Paris, which is what you can see that dot is.
Sorry, where's Paris? Can you just point out Paris? I can't see Paris there.
Sorry, guys. It's not 4K. Sorry, guys. So Elon Musk, President Macron has basically called an early election as a result of this. I don't know what he's doing. I'm not sure if he's trying to strategically stem the blood from flowing. He's just trying to preempt Marine Le Pen from coming in and basically ruining it. So that's set for Sunday, the 30th of June to the 7th of July. It goes over a period of time there. And what I'm expecting from there is, most likely Marine Le Pen, she's not running directly against Macron. It's her number two who would become the Prime Minister, not the President, the Prime Minister. That's what we're looking at, and it's the legislative branch. But very soon, in the next few years, we could see a runoff again between, as you can see on the screen, Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron. I'm really interested to see what exactly happens here. Their day of reckoning is happening in the European Union and in these countries. Do you guys have any thoughts on this particular thing?
I think it's hilarious. I think it's but this has been obviously coming for quite some time. I mentioned earlier, every culture breeds its own counterculture. Let me add a second layer to that. When you see a revolution eating its own, and we see that, okay, the heroes of the left, the Martina Navratilovas, first openly lesbian sports person, world champion tennis player, one of the greats of history in tennis, and celebrated for coming out and being bold and so forth. Now, persona non grata. We don't talk about Martina Navratilova anymore. Why? Because she got off the train at her stop and didn't keep going to everyone else's stop. Look at J.K. Rowling. Look at Germaine Greer. Look at these people who were heroes of the left not very long ago. And now they're persona non grata. The revolution is eating its own. And I have a theory. So every culture breeds its own counterculture. That's obvious. The revolution always ends up eating its own. That's also relatively obvious. But what is really interesting to me is what happens when you see both of those things happening at the same time. When you see the revolution eating its own and the counterculture beginning to rise up, and I began saying this about 2 years ago, I said that's when you know that massive social change is about to happen far faster than anyone thinks is possible. That's what happened in the 1960s, and we actually haven't seen that convergence of those two events since then until now. And I began saying 2 years ago, we are on the cusp of an enormous and very rapid social change because those two forces are converging.
It's funny you should say that, and I'll throw it to you guys in a sec, but I've noticed as a data point, young people, the Gen Z, they're calling them Zoomers because they're as conservative as the Boomer generation at that age. They have actually been leading this particular revolution in a lot of these countries. TikTok and a lot of other social media organizations that young people are on, a lot of young people are seeing Nigel Farage outcompete the boring Conservative, the boring Labor Party. And I have a lot of confidence in this. I love saying that line, God's a funny guy, and I just can't help but see these things come through.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting the change that you've seen there in Europe. I think part of it has been that the COVID era, so many people have now seen that the government, particularly the left government, has been lying to them. Mm-hmm. They see, I think this has had a big cultural change that so many people, yes, the big leftist government, they'll protect us, they'll look after us. And people are now saying, hang on, we've been lied to about this. And they said young people are seeing what's happening. Well, in the countries all around I'll never own a house. I won't be able to travel like previous generations did because they're going to put all these taxes on, on airfare and air travel sort of thing. I'll live in a 15-minute city, and I'll probably have to work till I'm 75 because there won't be a pension there. That's the future that young people see and say, hang on a minute, we want better than that. And that's why you are, I think, seeing this huge change in Europe. I think you will see we're seeing it in the polling in the US, a shift to Trump. Where you mentioned in the UK, the lessons out of the UK are if you have a conservative government and they do not act and govern as conservatives and stand up for conservative values, they will destroy themselves. That is what we see happening in the UK. They're going to hand the power over to a Labor government, which will have 4 or 5 years of disaster for the UK. It looks like then in that opposition period, reform will take over. We saw that in recent years happen in Canada. And that's the trend. We see it in, as you mentioned, Victoria. Victorian Liberal Party, because they are so weak, because they are not standing up for the values and trying to mirror what the left are telling them, simply fade away in the polls, and you'll see the destruction of the parties.
Yeah, well, what you've got is, as they were saying, the Great Reset. Do we really, though? Because when you look at how people have woken up to the lies that governments have been saying worldwide throughout COVID, once you see one lie, you start looking for others. And you can't actually shut down seeing them everywhere. It's left, right and centre. So I think it's more the Great Awakening than the Great Reset. And you're absolutely right, Joel. People are waking up to all this. You've got the younger generations, as previously mentioned, are looking at Andrew Tate and hero worshipping Andrew Tate. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but he has done a lot of good for the youth of today in trying to make them stronger and not emasculated, because we do have this emasculation of the male, especially the white male, which should not be occurring. We should all be proud of whoever we are, wherever we are.
No, absolutely. That's actually a perfect lead into the next story. The next story is actually about that. A lot of teachers and the media are complaining that a lot of Aussie kids are turning into alpha males. Experts are announcing an alarming rate.
Safe and effective.
Of alpha male behaviours in boys as young as 11 in Australia, with social media algorithms proven to be targeting men. I think help me pick this apart. Experts, alarming rate, alpha male behaviour, and social media algorithms targeting,
They go on in the article, and they do go on in the article, to basically say that Andrew Tate is partly to blame, and social media companies serving Andrew Tate to all these impressionable kids, etc. No. These young men are becoming alpha males due to the same forces that created Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate's not creating them. They're both a response to the same thing, and that is the complete emasculation of men. We have neutered men and completely removed from them any hope of a legitimate place in society. If they behave like men, they're evil. If they behave like women, they're useless, and they know that. What's really interesting is how this sort of the Bohemians are manifesting in so many really interesting ways. I asked a young guy, a school, early stages of high school. I said, "What's with all the mullets? Like, they were awful back in the 80s. What are you guys doing? Like, so there was some cool stuff in the 80s. Bring that back. Don't bring back the mullets." And he, completely serious, without any irony, he said, "You don't get it." I said, "Get what? Help me out here." He said, "We have mullets to show that we're not gay."
Wow.
That's amazing.
And he was absolutely dead serious, point blank. I have a mullet because then every other bloke and every chick knows that I'm not gay.
I'm getting old.
See, it's interesting. Like I said, I have a teenager, and she wants a male to be a male. She wants a guy to open a door, get her flowers, and she wants to be more feminine. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I have found that this emasculation of men is actually criminal, because you have an XY chromosome. A man's a man. He has testosterone. A woman's a woman. She has progesterone and estrogen.
How dare you?
I know, how totally sexist of me.
Nuked.
Oh, no.
All right, X has got us. Elon Musk has us. It's all good. Yeah, Craig, what do you think?
It's just, I think young boys want to be young boys. You want to kick a football and run around and tackle each other and stuff like that. And when they're told they can't do that, and when they're stopped and you've got to have the violence, and we can't have all this violence and things, and there's the pushback.
Yeah,
and that's I think this is something that's fantastic. You got to let the kids be boys, especially, sort of thing.
I'm so glad you mentioned the thing about the Topher, you mentioned about the mullets, because as I said, it's a bit like I mentioned earlier on, the energy's got to go somewhere, and it'll often manifest itself in ways you don't expect. You remember the GameStop revolution in early 2021?
Yes.
How everyone was like, you know what? They're trying to short GameStop, the owners of EB Games, and how about we screw that up and buy tons of GameStop? And then they lost like billions of dollars or something, these big hedge funds that stack the market and they work with the media and they collaborate. That's what I'm talking about. People, they do these funny things, and I don't know how to predict it, but it's when you see it, you know the pattern. These kids, and the kids, they all code and do all. I feel old.
The kids are all right, man. The kids are going to be all right.
The kids are going to be all right. The kids are questioning the they them pronouns. I mean, you've got these whole bunch of children going, I won't use it.
Yeah.
Fabulous, grammatically incorrect. I mean, really, we're bastardizing the English language.
Second last story. We've got an interesting story out of Victoria. I'm curious your thoughts on this, Topher, with regards to the CFMEU, have basically very angry with the AFL construction plans, including the Tasmanian Stadium and the Crows' $100 million headquarters, basically not including the CFMEU as much as they'd perhaps like. CFMEU leader John Setka made the point this is going to cost the AFL a lot of effing money. Projects without our full cooperation are going to be an effing misery for them. Discernible, lovely guy, phenomenal guy. Matt's always really well versed on these things. He made the point on his Twitter. Victoria, Australia is increasingly becoming Gotham City. I know someone who, despite strong hatred for the CFMEU, and never working in the construction before, just signed up as a member and is working on their sites because the money and conditions are too good to be true. They have confirmed to me that on the side that on the inside, the law doesn't matter. It is in part already Gotham, with implied and real violence, standover tactics, bullying, manipulations, and thuggery. They believe that the unions, along with their crony superannuation funds, cannot be controlled by government, and it seems we can't stop the hedonistic growth of unions, either when even those opposed are now joining their filthy ranks. The unions, if you haven't picked up on the pattern, guys, I'm sure some of you in the construction industry have worked this out, very closely associated with the Labor Party, whereas the Liberal Party, particularly in New South Wales, they're more tied to the property developers. Topher, what was your take on this particular story?
I have absolutely no opinion on this story, and I didn't kill myself by throwing myself off a high road.
That's true. Yes.
Look, John Setka is a man who stood in front of his own members in front of the CFMEU building during the height of the union protests against the vaccine mandates. And he told his members that he was going to stand up for them. And then he walked inside, walked upstairs, got on the radio, and absolutely stabbed his own members in the back. This is a man who has very, very deep roots, absolutely tied in with the Victorian Labor Party, with Daniel Andrews in particular, in my personal opinion, but with the Labor Party as a whole. They wield enormous amounts of power. And Victoria, in my opinion, essentially has a fourth branch of government. You know, they have the legislative, the executive, the judicial, and the union. And unfortunately, that's, we were treated to this absurd scene straight out of a movie where the Victoria Police and bikies were lined up in front of the union building, stopping union members from venting their anger at the union leadership. Victoria Police and people who, some of those individuals are absolutely known to be involved in organised crime. They have previous criminal convictions, and they're standing there right next to police officers protecting a union boss, shoulder to shoulder. If that doesn't tell you what's really going on in Victoria, then nothing will.
Yeah, it's what you see those comments there, nothing short of extortion. That's exactly what they are. Unless you pay us this money, and we'll threaten you, and we'll basically cause damage to you. That's extortion. And remember, all these, as you say, the ridiculous payments they're getting in Victoria, all this is coming from borrowed money. It's all put on the tab. It's running up the debt, right? It's not sustainable in the long term. There will eventually be a day of reckoning for this in Victoria. And when that day of reckoning comes, there will be catastrophic effects upon people's lifestyles. Another question is, why is the government funding these stadiums for the AFL? Yeah. That's what I'd like to know. Why should taxpayers' dollars go into building a stadium for the AFL in Tasmania? Now, the AFL are, with the money that the organisation raises, the TV rights that they have, surely they are wealthy and rich enough themselves to take money off junior sport to pay for all these expensive things and all these high grounds. That's I think another issue that the public should look at. Look, you have these. It's great to have these big stadiums, but someone has to pay for it. And where we're seeing that money instead being controlled by a group that's like the super wealth of the AFL. To think that they need some type of subsidies from the government is really outrageous.
Especially other countries.
Well, the unions really need to show their relevance, do they not? And I think the Godfather would be proud of this particular situation because that's what it's like. It's the mafia.
Absolutely.
Can I speak on this stadiums issue? It actually makes a lot of sense when you realise that governments depend on bread and circuses in order to avoid the people realising what's really going on. So, of course, the government is going to subsidise the bread and circuses, which then keep the people distracted so that they can keep on getting away with what they're doing, and they'll just keep on subsidising, and around the round it goes. We've got politicians that control billions of public money, essentially giving it to billionaires that own sports teams so that they can make multi-million-dollar broadcast contracts and entertain the people and make even more money. It's such an incestuous pit, and in the context of what we're talking about with the kind of corruption that we're discussing, it really makes perfect sense. It's just par for the course.
Absolutely, and I think that's why they have a fascination with paying them so much. You pay the gladiators a lot, take care of them, and the next day you send them out to die with regards to entertaining the public. Pay them a lot of money. Elevate the status. A lot of women, God bless them, the guys, whatever. A lot of women put that on a pedestal. I want to sleep with that guy. I can get some money out of him. Jared Hayne just got off the charges today, if you guys
saw that.
So that was appealed. And I think that this is a part of the control structure. Build a bigger Colosseum, Last story, we're almost at the 2-hour mark, is I was watching a really interesting interview between Donald Trump and he was being interviewed by Dr. Phil. First off, phenomenal interview. You can watch 19 minutes of it on his YouTube. The full hour blew my mind. I hadn't seen Donald Trump this authentic in a very long time.
Wow.
Fresh content and everything was really interesting. One of the things Dr. Phil put to Donald Trump was he showed him a map of the all the different areas that the Chinese-owned farmland. And it basically showed where the American bases are, which are the stars, and where the farmland's being bought up.
Wow.
And I just thought, I wonder to what extent that's happening here. Have you guys got any thoughts on this particular thing with regards to defense and everything?
I don't know where the Chinese are buying farmland. I am aware that they are. I've heard from a friend of mine who used to work for someone who was from China how large a farmland they were buying in Victoria, actually, funnily enough. Just don't know how close that was to any bases. But yeah, it's disturbing. It's disturbing. And it was an amazing interview. And I found Donald Trump, the one thing Donald Trump has that a lot of politicians don't, he's a real patriot. And that's what we're missing in a lot of the politicians of today.
I know there's a lot being born around the new airport in Western Sydney. That's been happening for at least 10, 20 years now. Badgerys Creek, which is obviously nearing completion very soon, which they always say. But also the blue gums in Victoria as well, with regards to the trees there being sold and sent overseas.
Can I make a slightly unpopular point, most likely, to do with Chinese ownership of things? I don't actually see how it's such a terrible thing from a geopolitical strategic perspective. Because the minute an actual war starts, and this is, I think, a miscalculation they've made, for example, with their Belt and Road Initiative, they've enslaved, effectively, lots of relatively impoverished nations with debt that they can never repay. And they're sitting there going, oh, well, now we're going to own all of these assets and you're going to do all these things for us. The minute there's an actual shooting war involving China, every one of those countries has to do is join the other side against China, and they can just forgive their own debts to China.
Yeah, pretty
Right?
much. Yeah.
There's actually, in a sense, from a geopolitical perspective, China's holding of all of these assets and holding of all of these loans that they've loaned out is, in a sense, a powerful disincentive for them to start any sort of a frivolous war.
Yeah.
Just a few other little contrary.
Yeah, sure.
points to that. I can remember one day down in Canberra, there was the Chinese premier was coming out to speak in the parliament. And there were two Chinese groups. There were the Falun Gong people, and there were the Chinese loyal communist supporters. Now, I don't know how many of these loyal Chinese communist supporters there are here in Australia, but there's an awful lot of them. And if there ever was a shooting war, which side would they be on?
Well,
they wouldn't be. They certainly wouldn't be on our side. But look, it's not only farmland that our concern should be. I think it's also real estate. Our bricks and mortar, land, freehold land. That is, we're seeing money coming in from not only China, but also from other countries in Southeast Asia. The legitimacy of the money, how it's been earned, is I think in many cases highly questionable when you see some of the prices that are being paid. And you can imagine if you've got $10 million in assets sitting in China, what's better? Would you rather have $5 million in Australian property that you can pass down? It's governed and secured by the rule of law and property rights, than have $10 million in China. So you see this money coming out of China. Are buying up Australian property, setting these prices in the market, especially here in Sydney, and that's basically forcing young Australians out of the market. I think we should be having restrictions, and it's not someone from China or overseas coming in and buying residential housing. That is not foreign investment. Foreign investment is where they, build in a new factory or a new plant or something, actually produce goods in Australia. This is a foreign takeover when they come and take over residential real estate.
Yeah, because you couldn't buy that there. The same, if you wanted to buy 100 acres. I did know of a property sale in Western Sydney near Badgerys Creek, around about 100 acres, I would say. That the person that bought it also bought 400 other acres, so 500 in total. My dad made a cracker point at the time. It's probably 2017. He said, Joel, not all of them like the Communist Party. Sometimes they're actually trying to get their money out of the country. And the problem is that we don't know who's who. I mean, first off, there's obvious, you'd have to understand the culture and have that conversation and ascertain and maybe even speak the language to ascertain that. But these things aren't obvious.
No, they're not. And it's not exactly a true communist government if you've got people bringing into a country such money. In a true communist government, no one's earning such money. And I know when you go to auctions around Sydney, there is a large Chinese community or somebody on the phone to someone in China who is buying up real estate. And it started off as new apartments or investment properties or whatever it was. It is no longer new apartments. It is existing dwellings.
Yeah.
So China, just for the record, is actually not a communist country. It's a communist country with Chinese characteristics, which when you actually take an honest look at what it is actually fascism.
Yeah.
So communism and fascism are very close cousins. Under communism, the government owns and controls the means of production. Under fascism, the government controls the means of production without necessarily owning it. And that was essentially the difference that I think it was Deng Xiaoping, the reformer, brought in when he recognized the benefits of private ownership thanks to a couple of farming communities in deeply inland China. I might go into that, 1974, if my memory serves me correctly. He recognized the importance of private ownership. He brought in his reforms, which then created this this communism with Chinese characteristics. It is essentially fascism, the merger, the bonding together of the corporate and government, and that's what we're actually seeing.
It's just a bad word. You can't use that word.
I do have one more thing to say before we close.
Yeah, please.
Sarah Palin. That's who I was trying to think of.
Yes.
Oh, right.
At the very start there you go. That's the bookend for you. From the very start of the show, Sarah Palin.
Very good. Very good. I didn't say anything about the WHO. Did you guys have anything urgent you wanted to add on this?
Actually, Del Bigtree was talking about it in his latest show, and what he did say was, yes, the treaty hasn't passed for now, but the IHR amendments have, which are also quite a scary little thing. And I think it was Rogoski is the name of the guy who was going through it quite well. He also said there's a section in there called I think it's section 61 from memory, which does have an opt-out for the countries, but there is a time limit on it. So I think we should all get busy writing to our MPs and senators. So rather than listening to Mark Butler.
unpopular opinion, but I want to hear from Craig first. What are your thoughts on this?
Just on this, now we argued this case about the last election that this would be made mandatory or binding. Right? So, no, you're all cranks, you're all crazy, you're all conspiracy theorists. Mark Butler, as Australia's health minister, gave a speech before the WHO and said binding treaty. He used the word binding. Now, it may not be technically legally binding in a sense, right? But what will happen, the World Health Organization will make these orders and the government will say, oh, we've got to do it. This is binding on us. So they will tell up front, they'll make the story when they're pressed that, oh, no, it's not binding. They make the comments that it is binding. And I said, when push comes to shove, right, they'll just adopt what the World Health Organization says. So, we have to do this because we've signed the treaty.
Yeah.
And they don't have a great track record of pandemic response, do they? I mean, it was
They got everything wrong.
They got everything wrong, and they're run by one guy, Tadros. And I'm sorry,
And
the
Gates,
arbiter.
and Bill Gates.
Well, yeah, that too.
Yeah.
He's a lovely person. And I do not have any suicidal thoughts either. But yeah, this is the problem. We've got one person who will basically be in charge of deciding when there is a pandemic, where there is a pandemic, and the definition of a pandemic.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity to ask a question to Ramesh Thakur, the former Assistant Secretary General of the UN, regarding these new pandemic treaties. And the question I asked him was, is there anything in the existing or proposed treaties, amendments, etc., that actually allows countries or individuals to hold the UN responsible if they get a pandemic response wrong? And the answer, of course, is a resounding no. There is no accountability mechanism. There is it adds such a distance between the ordinary people who have to obey what they're told and the people making those decisions that, at the moment when it's the federal government or the state government, accountability is extremely difficult. When it's the UN or the WHO, accountability is outright impossible.
And they decided on it, apparently. So people were celebrating that the treaty failed. They decided on the amendments at 9 p.m. before the whole thing was supposed to shut down. They were also supposed to have a 4-month allowable period whereby every country could read all these amendments. This did not occur. So apparently there will be some legal challenge to what has occurred.
Yeah. Unpopular opinion on this topic. I don't invest a lot of time in this WHO thing. Just like the Paris Accord, these are treaties, as Craig was alluding, that we can opt out on. Ultimately, at the end of the day, in order for these, I call them think tanks. People don't like me calling them think tanks. But in order for them to implement anything, they still need Aussie politicians to do it.
Pass legislation here.
And the last time I checked, unlike America, we do control our borders with regards to we don't have illegal immigration. We have a legal immigration problem, which we can fix with better politicians. But most importantly, we still have our vote. The referendum proved that 60 to 70% of people voting against the policy. We've got mandatory voting. There's a lot going for Australia. And at the end of the day, they still need our politicians that we still vote in order to do that. It's on us to apply ourselves politically. If these things get up, you will not see me hang up the coat the next day. You'll see me being like, all right, guys, I'll see you on Monday. I've already put together a plan of how we're going to move forward. At the end of the day, we can flip them the bird. And basically be like, even though Albo or whoever signed, Albo, who doesn't even have the majority of the country on his side, signed this, we're going to opt out, force majeure.
Joel, I think you're overlooking that both the Liberal and the Labor Party are agreeing to these treaties.
Yeah.
So you've got yes, that's technically true, but as long as you've got Liberal or Labor majorities in our federal parliament.
Yeah,
they will just rubber stamp whatever the WHO says.
Well, this is the warning to the Liberal Party. This is a very well established pattern that's going on around the seas. Again, 5 years ago, I was laying bricks and I was steel tying and I was landscaping. I didn't know about this if it wasn't for watching Trump and watching Nigel and New Zealand and Canada. What we're seeing right now is a complete realignment of politics. We're seeing Pierre Poilievre in Canada. They have a way to actually have a new leader. The membership vote for their Conservative Party leader. He is set to take the government at the next election there in Canada. Then you've got New Zealand. They've got a major party that's their Liberal Party, Conservative Party, that has some steel in their spine now because they've got people like Winston Peters and others in that. Couple Freedom Parties, Libertarian Party making that coalition up. The Deputy Prime Minister is Winston Peters. In the US, where I believe if it's a fair election, again, our vote's better than the Americans. If it's a fair election, Donald Trump's completely taken over the Conservative Party, completely. The MAGA movement's thrown out the rhinos, and he's looking to be the leader of the free world at the end of the year on November 5th. And in the UK, Nigel Farage has a 5-year plan now. He's committed to running on the 4th of July. He says, we're going to be the second largest party. That we won't be the ones that, I won't be the Prime Minister, but I'm committing to 5 years, this election and the next one, so that we can take back control of our country, execute Brexit in the right way. And he's realistic about this. And I totally think he's going to do it. Now, Peter Dutton, you can be that guy, or we can F around for a few more elections, and eventually it'll be forced out of your hands by the likes of Craig Kelly and others in these minor parties. And I guess that's brings us to a nice, neat close to the show. Forces like this, journalists like Avi and Rukshan and others, commentators like those around the panel, and active people committed to educating the grassroots in this country, the activists, we're not going away. And thanks to COVID, we all found each other. So now you're very far away from the reinforcements in Europe, 14,000 k's away from, the Middle East. You're kind of isolated here, and 60 to 70% of the country against you, as The Voice showed. It's a ticking time bomb. You can either set it right, or just as Nigel and the other countries are showing, we're going to set it right. Did you guys have any thoughts on that before I closed up?
No, thanks for having me.
I think it's been a good discussion. I hope you get a lot of good feedback, Joel.
Yeah.
No, my pleasure. No, you too, Natalie.
Fantastic
Absolutely.
Start for a first show. Congratulations, Joel.
Absolutely. Look, I'm looking forward to having you guys back. I hopefully have Graham Hood and John Larder and one other next week and in the coming weeks. But with regards to following these guys' phenomenal social media, you guys can see on the PowerPoint, we've got Topher Field, Natalie Dumer, and Craig Kelly, which is their names on Twitter. I'm sending them to X because I believe that is the #1 platform to basically be following them on. I trust that platform pretty much than the others, maybe other than Rumble and others, to not censor, and it's the best place to find them.
Natalie, where's your tick?
I don't have a tick because I'm the bad person that hasn't figured out X. I've got most of my followers on Instagram, unfortunately, and even LinkedIn. To be perfectly honest, I haven't gotten thrown off LinkedIn. I don't know how. But
all right, all the best. Everyone follow Natalie on there. We don't want it to get censored. And guys, if you like this platform, if you like the panelists, please leave it in the comments. Go follow them, go support them in whatever way you want. If you like the podcast and you like the fact that we're operating outside Sky News and the other mainstream outlets, I forgot to mention, if you don't like the newspapers that are being done, I literally just acquired the Light Australia newspaper.
Awesome newspaper.
This is a paper that's been doing a phenomenal job under David and Lisa Sheary in WA. This was a WA owned and run paper, and it's going to continue to run that way. I didn't take over this so that I could basically dictate. I want this to just know that the guy at the top wants it to stay the way it was set. I want to continue down that vision, and newspapers are a critical way. They're AI-proof, censorship-proof, and this is one way, one extra vector, 200,000 to 250,000 prints, one extra vector we can use to get the word out. I'm here to help, guys. I don't want to run. I just want to give you guys the tools needed. Every week, I'm going to have new projects under the Ark projects, which are going to help arm you guys. Next week, I'll be talking about the referendum map a little bit, which I merged with the last federal election results. But thank you. If you like the podcast, please donate. I'm liable to you guys and no one else. I don't receive money for quid pro quo, I'll adopt, this policy or that policy. This is owned by Joel Jammal. It's owned by these eyebrows. This isn't a Turning Point Australia. This isn't a Turning Point Australia thing. This is a Joel Jammal thing. But I'll continue to do some of the other stuff as well. But guys, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joel.
And looking forward to having you guys back soon. See you guys later.
See ya.